The story begins with a man named Paume, standing at the edge of a towering mountain, his comrades gathered behind him. As he gazed into the horizon, he announced that their enemies were approaching. In the distance, thousands of monsters advanced toward Paume and his comrades, ready to engage in battle. Among the advancing horde was the king of dragons, Gornthale, charging toward Paume and his comrades with relentless speed, ready to unleash devastation upon the remaining survivors. A woman stepped forward and spoke to Paume, informing him that the centaur's stronghold had fallen, leaving them with nothing else to rely on. The woman went on to say that the Cygna's Knight, the Resistance, the Cross Hunters, all the adventurers, and even the 6 heroes, once seen as the people's last hope, were now dead. She added that Paume was the only one left, the final adventurer who remained as their beacon of hope. As the King of Dragons drew near, Paume rallied his comrades, instilling courage in them. He urged them to fight for their lives, declaring this would be their final adventure. When midnight came, Paume was the only one still alive, though gravely wounded from the battle with the monsters. Paume surveyed his surroundings, realizing that everything had been destroyed in the battle against the monsters. As he gazed down, he saw his comrades lying lifeless on the ground, fallen in their struggle. On his knees, Paume found himself face to face with the severed head of the King of Dragons, Gornthale, which he had just cut off. Yet, despite this seeming victory, a sense of hopelessness overcame him. Looking up at the sky, he saw the dragon still flying above, alive and breathing, and at that moment, Paume knew it wasn't over yet. Paume then looked at the spot where he had severed the dragon's head and saw, to his dismay, that it was regenerating. In that moment, despair filled him. He had fought so hard, losing all of his comrades in the process, yet the dragon still lived. Paume muttered to himself that it had all been for nothing. Just then, the King of Dragons let out a deafening roar and launched itself straight at him. Seeing the dragon charging toward him, Paume closed his eyes, accepting that this was the end. He resigned himself to his fate, knowing there was nothing more he could do. As he braced for the inevitable, Paume thought that not only was their adventure coming to an end, but so too was the world. At that moment, Paume, fueled by anger, slammed his fist into the ground. His face twisted with fury as he resolved that this would not be the end for him. He refused to die in such a pathetic way. Memories of his fallen comrades, Philip, Jaden, Alexis, and many others, flooded his mind. Each of them had sacrificed their lives for the hope of victory over the monsters. With a roar of defiance, Paume swore he wouldn't accept this fate. This was not how he would let himself die. In that moment, Paume stood up, fury burning in his eyes, and shouted the dragon's name in rage. With every ounce of strength he had left, he gathered his remaining energy and prepared to unleash his magic for one final, decisive strike against the King of Dragons. Filled with renewed determination, he vowed that no matter what happened, he would not give up. But just as he was about to release his magic, blood poured from his mouth. His body had reached its limit, drained of energy, and he could no longer cast his spell. At that instant, the King of Dragons unleashed a massive surge of magical energy from its mouth, aimed directly at Paume. As the dragon's breath hurtled toward him, Paume wondered why it had to end this way. He thought to himself that if only he had been stronger, things might have turned out differently. His comrades might still be alive, and the world might have been saved. He thought that if given a second chance, he could change everything. Just as the dragon's breath struck him, he suddenly heard an angry voice shouting for him to get up. Jolted awake by a splash of cold water, Paume opened his eyes, confused by the sudden shift in his surroundings. One of the merchants, clearly irritated, scolded Paume for pretending to be sick while on the job, reminding him to remember his place as a slave. Paume, on the other hand, was stunned by the situation. He was astonished to find himself still alive, given his last memory of being killed by Gornthale, the King of Dragons. As he looked around, he was shocked to discover that he was in a completely different place. Observing his surroundings and the people around him, Paume realized he was in the slave market. Paume could hardly believe he was in a slave market, especially since he remembered that such markets had been abolished long ago. Yet, as he observed his surroundings again, it became clear that he was indeed in a slave market. When he turned his gaze to the merchant standing before him, he realized with shock that this was the same merchant who had overseen him 6 years earlier, when he was still a slave. At that moment, Paume understood with a jolt that he had somehow returned to the past. As he pondered the surreal situation, the merchant, growing impatient with Paume's inactivity and prolonged sitting, clenched his fist and delivered a sharp punch to him. Paume took the merchant's punch directly to the face but remained unmoved, his expression unwavering. He reflected to himself that, on that day, he had been brought back to the beginning of his story. Moments later, sitting on the floor with his nose bleeding, Paume considered the possibility that he might be dreaming, but he quickly dismissed the thought. The situation felt too real to be a mere dream. Unable to fully grasp the bizarre reality he was in, Paume realized there was no other explanation for his predicament. At that moment, a group of adventurers entered, accompanied by the merchant. The merchant explained that the slaves were intended to be used as bait for the adventurers, who could choose any of them they wanted. He added that the slaves were in good condition and had been recently acquired. Hearing this, one of the adventurers decided to take both of the slaves in front of him. Paume, feeling a surge of determination, resolved not to dwell on his current predicament. Recognizing this as his second chance at life, he was determined to make the most of it. A few moments before Paume was bought by the adventurers, outside the slave market lay the beautiful harbor city. As Raymond stepped off the ship, he shouted with excitement, thrilled to have arrived. His eyes sparkled with joy at finally being in Harbor City. Another adventurer, named Walker, approached from behind and asked Raymond if he was thrilled to have reached the city. Raymond, noticing Walker's own excitement, replied that Walker seemed just as happy as he was. At that moment, 2 more adventurers arrived from behind. One was a man named Turan, and the other a woman named Charlotte. Turan, catching the infectious excitement, exclaimed that he also wanted to take a break from their journey since they had finally reached Harbor City. He declared that this was where their adventure truly began. People lived in an era defined by adventurers who crafted their own quests and became heroes of their personal stories. During this time, mysterious gates had begun to appear worldwide, each leading to unknown realms filled with horrifying monsters unlike anything seen before. Countless adventurers had perished within the gates, but the unimaginably valuable and powerful items hidden inside continued to lure those with ambitious dreams. At that moment, Walker suggested that they needed bait to assist them when they ventured into the gates, which were teeming with monsters. Raymond, Turan, and Charlotte were puzzled by Walker's proposal. Walker elaborated, explaining that they couldn't plan effectively until they knew what awaited them inside the gates, as many adventurers had fallen due to unforeseen dangers. Therefore, Walker reasoned, they needed a slave as bait to help them navigate these dangerous situations. Charlotte then added that they needed someone to draw attention away from them while they made their escape. Agreeing with Walker, she endorsed the idea of using a slave as bait, calling it a sound plan. As they entered the slave market, a merchant greeted them and explained that the market was operated by the Gafor Merchant Union. He went on to say that all the slaves there were intended to be used as bait, so they could choose any slave they wanted. The merchant also assured them that the slaves were worth the price and recommended that they purchase from him. The merchant then pointed out 2 of the slaves, telling the adventurers that they were in excellent condition and had been acquired recently. Walker decided to take both slaves and informed the merchant of his choice. The merchant, pleased with the decision, agreed and, after completing the sale, wished them good luck on their adventures. Moments later, Walker, Raymond, Turan, Charlotte, and the 2 slaves, one of whom was Paume, stood before the gate. Walker approached the gate and informed everyone that he would mark the pillar to signal that they had entered. Noticing that no one else had ventured inside, he realized they would be the first to explore this gate. Walker then asked if everyone was ready, and they responded with excitement, confirming they were prepared. As they stepped through the gate, Raymond remarked that the experience felt unusual. Upon surveying their surroundings, he was astonished by the unique and mysterious environment that lay before them. As Raymond surveyed the surroundings, he commented that he had never encountered such a mysterious place before and that it was vastly different from what he had imagined. Walker reassured Raymond, advising him not to be overly nervous, and instructed everyone to move forward. He explained that gates were typically situated in areas distant from monsters, so they should have a brief reprieve from danger. Walker also added that they wouldn't be able to use the same gate to return, so they would need to find an alternative exit to reach their original starting point. Just as Walker was speaking, a monster appeared behind Charlotte and devoured her before she had a chance to react. The group was stunned that a monster had appeared so close to the gate, and within mere moments of their entry. Raymond screamed Charlotte's name, but it was too late, she had already been consumed. Panic spread among the adventurers, but Walker quickly took action. He activated his magic, drew his bow, and fired a volley of fire arrows at the monster that had just attacked Charlotte. At that moment, Walker realized something was seriously wrong. He instructed everyone to tie the slaves to the trees to use them as bait while they made their escape. One of the slaves pleaded to be taken along, but Turan told him to be quiet and follow orders. Meanwhile, Raymond closed his eyes, began running, and apologized to the slaves for leaving them behind. Holding Charlotte's lifeless body, Walker informed the others that the gate was too dangerous, and their mission was a failure, clearing it was impossible. He urged them to find an exit quickly. Meanwhile, Raymond, stunned and in disbelief at the events that had unfolded, was frozen with shock. Seeing Raymond's state, Turan grabbed him, shaking him awake. He instructed Raymond to pull himself together and listen to Walker. Turan reassured Raymond to calm down, acknowledging their failure at this gate but reminding him that they could always prepare for the next one. He urged Raymond not to give up and to focus on the present moment. As Turan reassured Raymond that they would all make it out of the gate alive, a massive monster emerged from behind and immediately crushed Turan to the ground, killing him instantly. Walker called out for Turan, but it was too late. Raymond, paralyzed by shock and disbelief, was at a loss for what to do. In a desperate move, Walker cursed the monster, drew his bow, and fired a barrage of fire arrows at it. However, the attack proved ineffective. The monster lashed out with its tongue, ensnaring Walker by the neck and pulling him toward it. Within moments, it bit down on Walker's head, killing him instantly. Seeing the horrific scene, Raymond fell into a state of panic, immobilized by fear. The monster then shifted its attention toward him, causing Raymond's terror to intensify. He began crawling backward in a desperate attempt to escape. However, the monster swiftly grabbed hold of his leg with its mouth. Raymond screamed in agony but continued to crawl, determined to flee from the beast. Meanwhile, a man standing some distance away watched Raymond being devoured with a cold, detached gaze. It was none other than Paume. Seeing Paume, Raymond called out for help, expressing relief that Paume was still alive. Bleeding heavily, Raymond confided that all his companions were dead, leaving only himself and Paume. He apologized to Paume for using him as bait and for abandoning him to die. Raymond, realizing he couldn't survive the gate alone, pleaded with Paume to help him, emphasizing that more people were needed to increase his chances of survival and escape. However, Paume remained unmoved, merely observing Raymond from a distance. Desperate, Raymond screamed and begged Paume to assist him instead of just watching him perish. Raymond cursed Paume for not helping him, but Paume merely gave a faint smile and told Raymond that it was too late to save him. As Raymond looked down and saw that half of his body was already consumed by the monster, he realized there was no chance of escape. Laughing bitterly, Raymond told Paume that he would not survive this gate and that Paume would be the monster's next prey. In that moment, Raymond was fully engulfed by the monster. After the monster had completely devoured Raymond, it turned its focus on Paume. Unbothered and calm, Paume took a fighting stance, ready to confront the beast. As the monster charged at him, Paume remained unfazed. With a swift, precise motion, he drove his spear through the monster's center, killing it instantly. Wiping the blood from his face, Paume vowed to himself that he would not die here and that this would not be the place where he met his end as in his previous life. A few moments later, Paume picked up a staff lying on the ground. Upon holding it, he discovered that the staff had the ability to produce fire arrows. Paume considered this newfound skill a valuable asset, noting that it was well suited to his current level of ability. However, he also recognized that having just one weapon was insufficient. Paume reminded himself that as an adventurer, he needed more than a single tool to face the dangers of the Mystic Gates, which were occupied with monsters. At that moment, Paume noticed a corpse of an adventurer lying in the Mystic Gates. Recalling that some adventurers hid their valuables in their shoes, he decided to check the deceased's footwear. From one of the shoes, he discovered a ring. When Paume put the ring on his finger, he was astonished to find it was a telekinesis ring. Suddenly, Paume's senses heightened as he heard a horde of monsters approaching from behind. He realized that the creatures might have been drawn to him by the scent of blood. In the heat of the battle, the monsters launched a fierce attack on Paume. He managed to defend himself initially, but one of the monsters struck a powerful blow, shattering his spear. Shocked by the strength of the monster, Paume realized the weapon was now useless. Just as the monster was about to deliver a fatal blow, Paume swiftly used his fire arrows to kill it. Determined to make use of his newfound telekinesis ring, he decided to test its power. Using telekinesis, he manipulated the fire arrows to target and strike all the remaining monsters in the vicinity. Although Paume managed to kill many of the monsters, he knew he couldn't keep fighting them indefinitely. While he was contemplating his situation, the staff that produced fire arrows suddenly went on cooldown. Noticing this, Paume relied on his brute strength, using the staff to fight off the remaining monsters. After a few moments, the staff's cooldown ended, allowing him to use the fire arrows once more. With renewed determination, Paume finished off the remaining monsters. As he surveyed the defeated creatures, he heard a voice behind him. As Paume turned to locate the source of the voice, he was surprised to see Charlotte, one of the adventurers who had bought him as bait, lying on the ground and near death. With her last breaths, she questioned Paume about his true identity, noting that he was no ordinary slave given his ability to wield both a spear and magic. Paume was taken aback to see her still alive, but before he could respond, Charlotte asked why he had Walker's staff. Glancing at his wrist, she noticed that he had awakened, and she wondered aloud how a mere slave could achieve such a feat. Charlotte, realizing the severity of the situation, accused Paume of being responsible for the deaths of her companions. She asked if he had orchestrated the entire tragedy. Before she could continue, Paume interrupted, clarifying that she had misunderstood. He explained that it wouldn't have mattered if he had planned their demise. Ultimately, he would have killed them all regardless, even if the monsters hadn't been involved. Shocked by Paume's revelation, Charlotte was taken aback. Paume, filled with disdain, declared his hatred for those who used slaves as mere bait. Without hesitation, he aimed the staff at her and delivered the final blow, ending her life. Moments later, back in the city, everyone was astonished that a mere bait slave was the only one who survived the gate and returned alive. Meanwhile, Paume reflected on his situation, realizing that the dice had already been cast. He knew he needed to act quickly to avoid repeating his past mistakes. As he glanced at the Adventurers Guild, he resolved that his first priority was to free himself from his life as a slave. Inside the Adventurers Guild, the guild leader, Abbas, was stunned to learn that Paume, the slave, was the only one who had returned alive. An executive informed Abbas that this was indeed the case. The executive added that, remarkably, Paume had returned without a single scratch. However, Abbas remarked that it wasn't surprising for someone designated as bait to come back unharmed. The executive then clarified that Paume was not only the sole survivor but that all the other adventurers who had accompanied him had perished in the dungeon. Upon hearing this, Abbas found it quite unusual. He noted that not only had Paume returned unharmed, but he had also come back on his own accord rather than fleeing. Abbas remarked that it was common for debt slaves to be used as bait again, even if they survived the gate. Despite this, he was astonished that Paume had not attempted to escape. This led Abbas to conclude that Paume must have been fully aware of the futility of trying to escape their control. The only way a slave could truly escape was through death, which was likely why Paume had chosen to return. He understood that escaping their hold was not an option. Abbas, after reflecting on the situation, told the executive that this was indeed the way of the Gafor Merchant Union. He questioned why the executive was reporting such a trivial matter. However, the executive interrupted Abbas, informing him of another significant detail: the slave had unlocked the first circle. Abbas was taken aback by the news that a mere slave had achieved this feat. He pondered the implications, realizing that a slave with such power could harbor resentment towards the merchant union. This new development raised concerns for Abbas, as he was uncertain about the potential consequences if things were to go awry. The executive then added that, In addition to everything else, the slave had requested a change in his contract. Abbas was perplexed and asked for clarification. The executive explained that the slave wished to register as an adventurer. Abbas was stunned by the audacity of a mere slave daring to alter his contract and seek to become an adventurer. To his further surprise, the executive informed him that Mr. Rakan had specifically ordered Abbas to personally handle the matter concerning Paume. Abbas stood in shock, taken aback by the unusual interest of a high-ranking executive in such a lowly slave. After a few moments, Abbas stood by the window, unable to believe that a mere bait, who was also a slave, wanted to become an adventurer. Paume recalled that in his own time, under Queen Signas, the status of a slave was supposed to have been abolished. However, this was merely superficial talk, as humanity had always been enslaved to Meso. The notion of slavery, perpetuated by the Maple world, dictated that those who failed to repay their debts would make amends through labor. This concept had become entrenched, despite the claims of progress. When Paume's only family, his father, collapsed due to illness, Paume was also thrust into slavery. He recalled the trial that led to his enslavement. Paume had purchased black moss from the Gafor Merchant Union on credit. However, the merchant union suddenly and drastically increased the price of the black moss to an amount that Paume could not afford to repay. As a result, he was accused of failing to settle the debt by the due date. Paume was then forced into labor for the merchant union, a form of exploitation that lasted for 6 long years. Paume was now in the guild master's room, resolute in his quest for revenge in this lifetime. He introduced himself to Abbas, noting that Abbas was a key ally of Rakan. Paume thought to himself that he had caught a significant target and planned to leverage Abbas to achieve his revenge. Abbas, sipping his tea, informed Paume that he had already reviewed the report and was aware of Paume's request to change his contract. He then told Paume he would be brief in his response. At that moment, Abbas told Paume that he was willing to revise the contract and offered to change it to one suited for an F-rank adventurer. Paume, pleased that Abbas was so quick to meet his request, thanked him but clarified that he wanted to be ranked as an E-rank adventurer, not F-rank. Paume thought to himself that he didn't want to be led by Abbas's pace. Abbas, surprised that Paume had rejected his offer and instead requested to be ranked as an E-rank adventurer, reminded him that the Adventurers Association hadn't even assigned him a rank yet. Paume then explained to Abbas that he had explored over 100 gates in the past 3 years as a baiting slave. Upon hearing this, Abbas replied that this still didn't justify Paume being ranked as an E-rank adventurer, pointing out that Paume had always served only as bait during those expeditions and had never actually captured a monster. At that moment, Paume asked Abbas since when had monster hunting become the defining virtue of an adventurer, leaving Abbas surprised by the question. Paume then elaborated, explaining that the reason the first adventurers made a name for themselves was through survival, not monster hunting. He clarified further, stating that the true virtue of an adventurer is returning alive. Paume felt confident in that moment that Abbas would accept his offer, believing that the information from someone who survived a gate was more valuable than individual accomplishments. Abbas admitted that Paume had a point and acknowledged that surviving as a bait slave for 3 years was no ordinary feat. However, he added that it was also Paume's only real achievement. Abbas went on to tell Paume that he had only entered dungeons with low difficulty rankings, and that his so-called survival skills wouldn't hold up in higher ranking gates. Abbas then accused Paume of taking him and the others for fools, thinking they would offer a risky contract to someone likely to die before even repaying the money. As Abbas looked at Paume, he thought to himself that Paume wouldn't get far with such overconfidence. However, in that moment, Abbas felt an unusual repulsion, as if Paume was different from the other slaves. After carefully considering, Abbas spoke up and told Paume about a gate where only 5 people could enter at a time, and it already had 12 scars, meaning the bones of at least 12 entire parties were buried there. Abbas then challenged Paume, telling him that if he was truly as valuable as he claimed, he had to prove it by entering the gate and making it back alive. Abbas added that if Paume survived and returned, he would do anything Paume asked of him. Moments later, Paume stood with a group of 4 adventurers. One of them introduced himself as Shev, the tank of the group. Shev mentioned that he had heard from Abbas that Paume was a baiting slave but reassured him, saying he didn't care about that and that Paume didn't need to worry. He added that his comrades felt the same as he gestured toward his team. Paume then responded, expressing his hope that they would work well together. Chev then mentioned that he had heard Paume could use fire magic, to which Paume confirmed it was true. One of the other adventurers stepped forward with a cocky attitude and said he'd heard that mages couldn't use magic or elements other than the one they were born with. He added that, apparently, any item unrelated to their element was useless to them, making things complicated. Chev then gathered everyone's attention, stating it was time to stop chatting. He explained to Paume that their mission wasn't to hunt monsters but to retrieve items left behind by the 12 parties that had been annihilated. Inside the gate, once they collected the items, they would return them to the Union. Chev added that the Union would reward them with 3,000 meso for each item they retrieved. Max, one of the adventurers, expressed his dissatisfaction with the price, saying it was too low. He argued that if they only retrieved a few items, they wouldn't gain anything significant, as items for First Circle adventurers were worth 7,000 meso or more. Therefore, the price they were being offered wouldn't even be half of the original value. Another adventurer named Tom interjected, telling Max to stop complaining. At that moment, Chev cut in, instructing them to stop talking and emphasizing that it was time to earn some money. Moments later, they all entered the gate. Max remarked that while the area was bright, it felt dreary. Chev then urged everyone to pay attention to their surroundings, noting that there was still a high chance of a long battle in the dense forest. He suggested they set up a base before that happened. Tom proposed that they establish their base in a tree, pointing out that the branches would make it easy to hide and move between them. Chev agreed, calling it a great idea, and decided they should proceed with that plan. At that moment, they took out all the tools needed to set up camp. Max approached Paume and assured him he could rest, as setting up camp was his specialty, while Tom worked on the setup. After a short while, they successfully finished building the base in the tree. Chev then announced that now that the base was ready, they would split into 2 groups to search the surrounding area. The group split up, with Tom, Max, and Roa assigned to Group 1, while Chev and Paume would form Group 2. Chev explained that they would each take the east and west sides to scout the area and then return to the base. He emphasized that if anything happened, they should send a signal and rush back to the base immediately. Chev then asked everyone if they understood, and they all confirmed they were clear on the plan. A few moments later, as they explored the gate, Chev was surprised that they hadn't encountered a single monster, let alone any items from the past adventurers. He told Paume that they would need to move further inside the next day. Changing the subject, Chev asked Paume how his first mission as an adventurer was going. Paume admitted that he was feeling nervous. Chev laughed when he heard that and told Paume it was the same for everyone. He explained that even after being an adventurer for a long time, he still felt nervous every time he stepped inside a gate. However, he added that despite the fear, he had the courage to enter because he had good people by his side. Chev acknowledged that it might sound awkward for him to praise them himself, but he wanted Paume to know that they were truly good companions. Chev then told Paume that he felt sorry when he heard about his past as a bait and a slave, admitting he couldn't imagine how difficult it must have been for him. Turning to Paume, Chev invited him to join his squad, if that was okay. However, just then, he noticed something on the ground. Paume quickly responded, asking Chev not to feel sorry for him. Night fell, and everyone sat around the fire. As they chatted about work, Chev suddenly interrupted, urging them to stop discussing it while they were eating, reminding them they could think about work the next day. Meanwhile, Paume quietly listened to their conversation. A short while later, as it was time to sleep, Chev, Max, Tom, and Roa approached Paume, asking if he was still awake. When they saw he wasn't responding, they burst into mischievous laughter. Max joked that Paume wouldn't be able to answer them because he was fast asleep. Max then remarked to Chev that he was being overly cautious since they had already mixed a sleeping herb into Paume's food. He confidently stated that Paume wouldn't wake up anytime soon because the herb was extremely powerful. Max added that Paume had consumed so much of it that it was a miracle he was still alive. He then mentioned that the fire arrow staff Paume was supposed to fetch would fetch them a good amount of money if they sold it. Excited by the thought, Max pulled out his dagger, intending to kill El Paume right then and there. As Max plunged his dagger toward El Paume, he felt nothing when he struck. Confused, he opened the cover, only to find it was empty, filled with rocks and wood shaped like a human body. Everyone gasped in shock, realizing that El Paume was nowhere to be found. At that moment, Chev instructed everyone to search for El Paume, insisting he couldn't have gotten far. Just as he spoke, a massive explosion erupted nearby, engulfing their base in flames. Panic spread as they realized their food supplies could also be lost in the fire. Chev then suggested that this might all be El Paume's doing, but before he could finish, Tom shouted in alarm, telling Chev to look at what was in front of them. As Chev looked up, he was shocked to see a massive monster staring right at them. In that moment, he realized that El Paume had set them up and used them as bait. Just then, the monster lunged at them with a powerful attack, but they managed to dodge just in time. From a distance, El Paume observed the scene and thought to himself that they shouldn't have been so kind to him if they intended to trick him. After all, in a gate where over 12 parties of veteran adventurers had failed, he couldn't believe they would so easily welcome a slave like him. El Paume concluded that it was clear the four were up to something sinister. El Paume studied the monster and realized it was the boss of that area. He suspected it might be that monster, given the broken remnants scattered on the ground, but he never expected it to be this massive. Meanwhile, the four adventurers were frantically running away from the creature, panicked and unsure of how to deal with it. Chev thought to himself that the monster they were facing posed a significant disadvantage. Tom then asked Chev what the creature was, and Chev replied that it was known as a gold slime, something not typically seen in gates. He further explained that the gold slime was a rare boss monster that only emerged from red gates. Its body was composed of acid, making it the worst possible matchup for a group that relied solely on melee weapons. Chev then added that the most dangerous aspect of the gold slime was its ability to launch long-range attacks. Just as he said this, the gold slime fired a magic spell called Acid Arrow at them. Luckily, they managed to dodge it, but the path affected by the attack was left corroded and burned, as the gold slime could shoot acid from its body. In a state of panic, Tom exclaimed that the monster was too powerful and expressed his uncertainty about how they would stand a chance against it. Tom asked Chev if there was any way to deal with the gold slime, but Chev urged everyone to get out of the area first. He explained that the acid arrow had a cooldown of 1 minute, giving them time to recover and formulate a strategy. Chev then informed them that they needed to break the core located in the gold slime's head to defeat it. Hearing that the monster's skill was still on cooldown, Max turned back, ready to attack. Chev saw Max preparing to attack and shouted for him to stop, insisting they should all strike the monster at the same time. Max argued that they still had enough time before the cooldown expired, claiming it was their chance to attack. Just as he said this, the gold slime shot another acid arrow, and it cut Max in half, killing him instantly. The rest of the group was stunned by the sight. While Chev felt a wave of confusion, he was certain there should have been plenty of time left before the monster's cooldown ended, yet it had used its skill again. At that moment, the gold slime shot another acid arrow, and all four of them disintegrated instantly under the monster's corrosive attack. El Paume realized the fight was over for them. He thought to himself that Chev had been right, but he also recognized that a gold slime could consume items to grow stronger with each one it ingested. This meant that the usual cooldown time of 1 minute had been reduced because the gold slime had become more powerful. El Paume noticed that the gold slime was abnormally large and that its cooldown was nearly non-existent. He understood, after observing the monster, why the other parties that had come to this gate had all failed and perished. It became clear to him that the gold slime had grown so powerful it could easily be classified as a creature suitable for a yellow gate, which was 2 levels above a red gate. El Paume realized that the gold slime was no longer a monster a first circle adventurer like him could handle. He acknowledged that the mission was now a failure, but then he recalled Abbas's words urging him to prove that he deserved to be an E-rank adventurer. In that moment, El Paume made the decision not to retreat. He resolved to confront the gold slime head-on. As the gold slime roamed around searching for its next prey, El Paume launched a sneak attack, using his fire arrow to strike at the monster's core. Unfortunately, the attack wasn't powerful enough, and the gold slime survived. El Paume, realizing this, thought to himself that the monster might possess magic resistance, as he was certain he had aimed directly at its core. Paume then thought to himself that if that was the case, 5 more shots at the monster's core might be enough to take it down. A smile crossed his face as determination surged within him. He was resolved to kill the monster and prove to Abyss that he was worthy of being an adventurer of a higher rank. At that moment, the gold slime began firing multiple acid arrows simultaneously. Despite the struggle, Paume managed to dodge the attacks. He reminded himself that he needed to hit the exact same spot as before without any mistakes. While he knew that no ordinary mage could execute such precision, Paume was no ordinary mage. In his previous life, he had been recognized as the best user of the telekinesis skill, enabling him to control his fire arrows with precision and strike the target exactly where he intended. In that moment, Paume fired his first, second, third, and fourth fire arrows with pinpoint precision, striking the exact same spot on the gold slime's core. Now it was time for him to unleash his final fire arrow for the killing blow. Just then, the monster launched a massive attack toward him, but Paume easily dodged it. Seizing the opportunity, he activated his fire arrow with a smile, confident in the outcome. He sent it flying toward the monster's core, and upon impact, the gold slime exploded, annihilating it in an instant. As the gold slime exploded, its acidic body splattered everywhere, but Paume skillfully dodged the fallout. Moments later, he observed that the entire area affected by the monster's body had eroded significantly. As he descended to inspect the scene, he spotted a tiny round red ball and quickly recognized it as the core of the gold slime. Without hesitation, Paume absorbed all the magical essence contained within the core into his body. Moments later, in the Adventurer Guild, Paume sat across from Abyss. Breaking the silence, Abyss remarked that Paume was not just a big talker, he had actually accomplished what Abyss had tasked him with. However, he then asked Paume why he had returned alone once again and noted that he didn't have the items he was supposed to retrieve from the gate as part of his mission. Paume then explained to Abyss that the adventurers assigned to team up with him were inexperienced and had ulterior motives, trying to steal the items he had worked hard to collect. To avoid them, he had chosen to separate from the group, only to encounter the boss monster, which ultimately led to their demise. When Abyss asked what kind of monster had killed his team, Paume replied that it was the gold slime. Abyss was taken aback and realized that if it was indeed the gold slime, all the equipment left in the gate would now be melted, devoured by the monster. Abyss, realizing the implications, felt a wave of annoyance wash over him. All the equipment rented by the Merchant Union to the adventurers was now destroyed, and there was no chance of recovering it due to the gold slime. This represented a significant loss for the Union. On top of that, Abyss had to deal with Paume, who had managed to survive and make it out of the gate, adding to his frustrations. There were a few common rules governing gates. First, the number of people allowed to enter was limited, only those marked on the gate could pass through, and once that number was reached, the gate would deactivate until everyone inside had been eliminated. Second, entrance was restricted based on the gate's difficulty level and the adventurer's circle levels. Gates were categorized by color, ranging from red to purple, and individuals with higher circle levels than the gate's difficulty could not enter. Thirdly, there was only one chance to raid each gate. This presented a significant obstacle for adventurers. If anyone who entered the gate survived and exited, the gate would be destroyed and could not be accessed again. As long as the adventurers who entered remained alive, there would be no additional opportunities to raid that gate. Abyss reflected on this, realizing that the gate Paume had entered was already a lost cause. Additionally, dealing with a gold slime was far beyond the capabilities of any adventurer, rendering the gate essentially useless. Abyss then told Paume that even though he had managed to survive and the items had all melted, his failure to retrieve them due to the gold slime did not change the fact that he had not completed the gate and had ultimately failed to conquer it. Just as Abyss was speaking, Paume interrupted, asking him to be patient, as he had not yet finished his explanation. At that moment, Paume removed his leather armor from his arm, and Abyss was shocked to see that he now bore a second circle mark. With a confident smile, Paume informed Abyss that he had consumed the core of the gold slime he had defeated. Abyss was taken aback by this revelation. Paume then asserted that this achievement was more than enough to prove his qualifications, insisting that Abbas fulfill his promise to promote him to an E-rank adventurer. Abbas, filled with excitement, announced to Paume that he was not only going to promote him but that Paume would now be elevated to a D-rank adventurer. Paume was taken aback by this unexpected news. Abbas continued, enthusiastically assuring Paume that if they worked together, he would treat him as if he were a C-rank adventurer. In that moment, Paume took the contract and signed it, sealing his new fate. Abbas, observing Paume, reflected that promoting someone who wasn't even a third circle mage to C rank would usually be seen as excessive. Adventurer ranks were heavily influenced by mage's circle, which signified their power, and the differences were stark. However, Abbas recognized that Paume was anything but ordinary. The rapid advancement from a first circle mage to a second circle in such a short time was unprecedented. Abbas thought to himself that he had never encountered anyone like Paume before and realized that he needed to recruit him for future endeavors. Paume realized that his treatment had improved faster than he anticipated, but he chose not to dwell on it. His focus shifted to the significant event approaching in the next few days, the opening of the Red Rank's first 100-member gate raid. This major event was garnering attention from both the Lithport Merchant Union and various guilds, and Paume suspected that the Gafor merchant was also quite interested. Considering the urgency of his own plans, Paume thought it might be a perfect opportunity to advance his goals while the excitement around the event was building. Paume then asked Abbas for a favor, prompting Abbas to inquire about what he needed. When Paume requested a loan, Abbas was taken aback and annoyed that he would dare to ask for money. After a moment, Abbas moved to the window, watching Paume as he considered his next steps. Though Paume received the funds, it wasn't quite enough for his needs. Still, he reassured himself that it would be a good starting point for his plans. Paume considered that the newly discovered 100-member gate was a red level gate, accessible only to those of at least 2 circles. Typically, the Gafor Merchant Union focused on selecting high-ranked adventurers, but they were willing to invest in a second circle mage like Paume because they had their sights set on this gate. Although he had secured some money, he knew it would be unwise to spend it all on items that suited his level, as those would be prohibitively expensive. Instead, Paume thought it might be more strategic to consider purchasing a slave at the slave market, as that could provide him with valuable assistance. As Paume contemplated his options, he arrived at the Lith slave market. A merchant greeted him warmly and inquired about the type of companion he was seeking, asking whether he needed someone for dungeon bait or a warrior to fight alongside him. Paume replied that he already had someone in mind and asked the merchant to simply lead the way. The merchant, puzzled by Paume's response, nonetheless guided him through the market until they reached the punishment ward. The merchant explained to Paume that they had arrived at the punishment ward, a place designated for disciplining slaves who misbehaved, exactly the type of individual Paume seemed to be looking for. With a hint of nervousness, the merchant asked Paume once more if he truly wanted the slave before him. Paume affirmed confidently that this was indeed the person he had been searching for. Before Paume's return, a significant event unfolded, the death of a person named Aaron, known as the Polearm Hero, which accelerated the end of the world. In her final moments, Aaron had one last disciple, Debo, infamous for being the hero killer. When Paume approached him, Debo coldly informed him that he didn't need to be there, insisting that he didn't know Paume and dismissively told him to leave. The merchant, upon hearing this, apologized for Debo's rude behavior. However, Paume reflected that while Debo's demeanor might have changed since his return, he was now merely a slave. Paume found it offensive that adventurers like Debo were being treated as nothing more than slaves, which he did not approve of. The merchant then mentioned that no one was as reckless as Debo. Paume reflected that, like himself, Debo was one of the few who gained attention after the world's last day of destruction. Paume recalled that he and Debo had often been compared to each other. They were from the same region, had awakened around the same time, and possessed similar skills. But what truly connected them was their shared dire need for money at that moment. Paume then asked Debo directly how much he was worth. Debo, after studying Paume, remarked that he looked like a young master from a wealthy family. Without hesitation, Debo declared his worth as 1 million meso and asked if that amount was acceptable to El Paume. At that moment, El Paume recalled that Debo had a younger sister who, unfortunately, suffered from black blood disease. While El Paume was lost in thought, Debo grew irritated and told him to leave if he didn't have the money. But just then, El Paume reached into his bag, pulled out a stack of bills totaling 1 million meso, and showed it to Debo. Both Debo and the merchant were stunned at the sight of the money. The merchant immediately asked El Paume if he was really willing to pay 1 million meso for Debo, while Debo, still in disbelief, questioned whether the money was real or counterfeit. El Paume then asked them to hold on and told Debo to listen carefully. He explained that the contract terms would last for 1 year, with the dungeon profits being split 70-30 in El Paume's favor. El Paume added that he would have the first pick of any items that dropped from the gate. At that moment, the merchant realized that El Paume was proposing a partnership with Debo as an equal party member, not as a slave. El Paume then handed the contract to Debo, telling him to review it. Debo immediately grabbed the contract and warned El Paume that there would be no turning back once it was signed. As he reviewed the terms, Debo realized that what El Paume was offering was an incredible deal, far better than what most slaves could hope for. Usually, slaves wouldn't receive any share of the loot from the gates they entered with their buyers. Understanding the significance of the offer, Debo bit his thumb and signed the contract with his blood. El Paume, observing this, thought to himself that Debo had accepted without hesitation because his sister's life depended on it. Debo needed money urgently to save her. El Paume then gave a small smile and told Debo that since the contract was sealed, they would head straight to the gate immediately. Debo, full of enthusiasm, assured El Paume to leave everything to him. El Paume's expression then turned serious, and he told Debo that he needed to prove his worth. In response, Debo, smiling confidently, promised El Paume that he would work harder than anyone El Paume had ever seen. Moments later, as the two made their way to the gate, Debo, still a bit confused, expressed his gratitude to El Paume for buying him a new weapon. However, he mentioned that he usually fought with a longsword, and right now, he was holding an axe. Debo suggested that they return to the shop to exchange the weapon for one he was more accustomed to using. El Paume looked at Debo and told him that from now on, he would be using a polearm when working with him. If Debo didn't like it, El Paume added, they could end the contract right then and there. With no other choice, Debo reluctantly agreed to use the polearm. As they stood in front of a gate, Debo asked if this was the gate where El Paume intended to test his skills. The gate was a red-level gate with an entry limit of 8 adventurers. Noticing this, Debo looked around and asked where the rest of the party members were. He then remarked that someone with El Paume's wealth surely had a strong team of adventurers ready. Debo then asked if there was a healer in their party, but El Paume simply stared at him, expressionless. Confused, Debo asked why El Paume was looking at him that way. El Paume calmly assured Debo not to worry, saying they had enough party members. Relieved, Debo sighed and admitted that El Paume had scared him for a moment. But as he spoke, El Paume pointed directly at him and declared that Debo was the only party member he needed to enter the gate. Debo was stunned by this revelation. At that moment, El Paume kicked Debo inside the gate and urged him not to waste any more time. Debo, however, was screaming in disbelief at the situation he found himself in. Once inside the gate, he turned to El Paume, anger boiling over, and exclaimed that it was crazy to attempt an 8-person gate with only the 2 of them. He insisted that there should be a limit to El Paume's recklessness and added that he shouldn't treat a life or death situation as a joke. Debo then pointed out that, on top of everything, he had to wield a weapon he wasn't familiar with at all. In response, El Paume looked at Debo with evident annoyance. Just then, as Debo continued to voice his complaints, a horde of monsters known as stumps charged at El Paume and Debo, drawn by Debo's earlier screams. These stump monsters were notorious for their tough bark, which swords and spears struggled to pierce, and now a large number of them were advancing toward the two. El Paume quickly stepped in front of Debo and instructed him to move aside. He then unleashed a fire arrow, incinerating the approaching stump monsters in a blaze of flames. After defeating the monsters, El Paume expressed his disappointment, saying he hadn't expected Debo to act so cowardly right after they entered the gate. He warned Debo not to make the same mistake twice. Meanwhile, Debo was stunned by El Paume's ability to dispatch all the monsters with a single strike and thought to himself that El Paume was truly a monster in his own right. In a different location outside the gate, a woman informed a mysterious man that the merchants had taken the bait. She added that they were still working on the plan but had already selected the individuals they would be sending. The woman then asked the mysterious man if they had permission to proceed with the plan. At that moment, holding up a cup of wine, the man replied that he would achieve freedom in this world. Back with El Paume and Debo, they had finished dispatching all the monsters in the vicinity. Debo then reported that he had collected a total of 27 magic stones from the defeated creatures. Upon hearing this, El Paume suggested they continue moving forward, and Debo readily agreed. As they walked, Debo reflected that he had initially thought El Paume was just a crazy person, but after witnessing his fighting skills, he realized El Paume was no joke, he was the real deal. Debo observed El Paume using his telekinesis, manipulating fire arrows with remarkable precision, and he thought to himself that he had never seen anyone control telekinesis in such a way before. Debo then smiled to himself, thinking that working with a talented person like El Paume would allow him to earn a lot of money. With the profit split at 70-30, he realized he could save on medical and living expenses for his little sister. While Debo was lost in these thoughts, El Paume suddenly interrupted him, saying they had found what they were looking for. Confused, Debo turned to see another group of stump monsters, numbering around 9, in front of them. Upon hearing El Paume's comment, Debo was puzzled by what he meant by a perfect number. El Paume then looked at Debo seriously, as if urging him to figure it out. Moments later, Debo found himself fighting the monsters alone, just as El Paume had instructed. As he battled the creatures, Debo couldn't help but think how annoying it was to face these monsters with a weapon he was unfamiliar with, making it difficult to hold his own. He wished he had 10 lives, imagining how much easier the fight would be if he did. Observing from a distance, El Paume thought to himself that Debo had mentioned he had only ever used a sword as his main weapon, which made his awkward movements all the more evident. However, El Paume believed that Debo would soon come to realize that the polearm he was wielding would be the key to unlocking his true potential. He had no doubt about Debo's talent, especially since he was the only one chosen by the polearm hero to be her student. As Debo fought the monsters, he began to realize that the polearm he was wielding had a significant range and impressive power. In fact, it felt more comfortable than the sword he was used to. He noticed that after he relaxed and stopped tensing up, the polearm felt lighter in his hands. By wielding it more gently, he discovered that he could easily slash through the monsters, making it simple for him to take them on alone. El Paume, observing Debo's progress, thought to himself that Debo had quickly gotten the hang of the polearm. Despite not having awakened a circle yet, Debo was already showing remarkable skill. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and Debo screamed in surprise, initially believing it was an earthquake. Just then, a massive monster burst through one of the nearby rocks and lunged at Debo, but he managed to dodge the attack just in time. He was taken aback by the sheer size of the creature. As the monster prepared to deliver a powerful blow, El Paume rushed in to save Debo, guiding him to a safer position. Once there, El Paume swiftly threw Debo to the side to protect him from the impending attack. El Paume then spoke to Debo, explaining that the monster's size had no bearing on its threat level. In fact, larger creatures were often easier to defeat. With that, he launched a fire arrow directly at the monster, but to his surprise, the creature managed to block the attack. Realizing the monster's speed was greater than he had anticipated, El Paume decided to alter his approach. He shot another fire arrow, this time using telekinesis to guide it with precision. As he maneuvered the arrow to strike from behind the monster, he was taken aback when the creature still managed to block the attack. El Paume was shocked to witness this unexpected display of agility. El Paume and Debo began to sprint away from the monstrous threat. It soon became clear to El Paume that magic was ineffective against the creature. He noted that it wasn't that his attacks were failing, rather, the monster was simply adept at blocking every one of them. Upon further reflection, El Paume realized that the branches protruding from the monster were interfering with his spells. Just then, the monster launched a powerful attack toward them. Fortunately, Paume quickly employed his telekinesis, allowing him to maneuver both himself and Debo out of the dangerous situation. Debo exclaimed to Paume that he thought he was going to die. However, Paume quickly interrupted him, instructing Debo to focus on the stump monsters while he handled the larger creature. Debo was shocked to realize that several stump monsters were already charging toward them, ready to attack. As Paume moved to confront the giant monster, Debo attempted to stop him, but Paume was too fast. Without hesitation, Paume summoned another fire arrow and unleashed it at the enormous creature. Seeing Paume's attack, Debo thought to himself that it was futile. Defeating such a monster required a proper plan, and they needed to find a way to escape. However, as the fire arrow exploded, it surprisingly inflicted damage on the creature. Debo was taken aback, realizing that Paume had managed to hurt the monster after all. At that moment, Paume realized he understood how to effectively combat the monsters. He concluded that he just needed to shoot fire arrows and use telekinesis to maneuver them around the branches that protected the creatures. Although the branches were quick to block his attacks, Paume knew he had an advantage. As a second circle mage, he could conjure magic twice. This ability allowed him to create 2 fire arrows simultaneously, increasing his chances of success against the monster. Debo watched in astonishment as Paume conjured 2 fire arrows simultaneously. Not only that, but Paume had also devised a clever strategy to take on the monsters. One arrow would serve as a distraction while the other approached from behind. Debo realized that even if the monster managed to block the first arrow, it would be unable to defend against 2 consecutive attacks. As the monster struggled to counter Paume's tactics, Debo couldn't help but think that Paume was even more formidable than he had initially imagined. At that moment, several stump monsters managed to slip past Debo and positioned themselves behind Paume, preparing to attack. Debo, noticing the danger, shouted a warning to Paume. However, Paume remained calm, using his telekinesis to direct his fire arrows and swiftly eliminate all the monsters that had approached from behind. Turning toward Debo, Paume expressed his disappointment, telling him that he expected Debo to handle the smaller monsters on his own, leaving Paume to assist only when necessary. At that moment, the massive monster launched a powerful attack toward Paume, but he skillfully dodged it. Paume reminded himself that he couldn't let his guard down against such a formidable foe. Just then, Debo rushed in front of Paume, swinging his pole arm and delivering a hefty blow to the monster. Turning to Paume, Debo exclaimed that he had just saved him and demanded that Paume retract his earlier criticism. Paume smiled at Debo, activating the power of his staff, and remarked that Debo finally seemed to be proving his worth. With newfound determination, Paume declared that it was time for them to finish off the monster, and Debo wholeheartedly agreed. In that moment, Paume summoned 2 fire arrows, aiming them directly at the monster's branches to clear a path for Debo. With the obstruction gone, Debo swung his pole arm and delivered a powerful blow to the creature. Paume instructed Debo to attack the monster from the left while he would strike from the right, and Debo nodded in agreement. As they launched their coordinated assault, they unleashed a flurry of attacks, successfully severing multiple branches of the monster. However, just then, the monster retaliated, delivering a heavy blow toward Debo. As Debo was about to be thrown into the creature's maw, Paume quickly used his telekinesis to pull Debo to safety, preventing disaster. At that moment, Paume realized that the situation was becoming increasingly troublesome. Meanwhile, Debo felt overwhelmed, believing he wouldn't be able to escape the monster's relentless attacks. Shouting at Debo to finish the monster, Paume urged him to act decisively. Seizing the moment, Debo swung his pole arm with all his might, delivering a powerful strike to one of the monster's eyes, completely destroying it and leaving the creature partially blind. As he landed back on the ground, Debo declared that he wasn't finished yet. With renewed determination, he launched himself at the monster again. Paume, using his telekinesis, retrieved the pole arm lodged in the monster's eye and sent it back into Debo's waiting hands. With perfect timing, Debo executed another fierce attack, injuring the monster severely. The monster, however, still clung to life. In a decisive moment, Paume fired 2 of his fire arrows directly into the creature's mouth, incinerating it to death. After the threat was eliminated, Paume approached Debo, who was nursing his injuries, and praised him for his excellent performance. Debo, in turn, complimented Paume, and they stood together, watching as the monster was reduced to a charred husk. Moments later, as night fell inside a cozy house, a little girl glanced at the clock and realized it was getting late. She was about to eat her dinner and reminded herself to eat quickly so she could go to bed. Just as she began to pray, she heard a knock on the door. Curious, she opened it and was taken aback to see her older brother, Debo, standing there, bruised and covered in blood. With a smile despite his condition, Debo greeted her, saying he was back. Overwhelmed with emotion, his sister couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She burst into tears and immediately hugged her brother tightly, relieved to see him. In a desolate area, a solitary house stood, belonging to Paume. Upon arriving home, Paume was met with a heart-wrenching sight. His father lay lifeless, having been left unattended since Paume was taken as a slave at a young age. Staring at his father's still form, Paume remained silent, a storm of emotions brewing within him. With a heavy heart, he activated his fire magic, igniting flames that consumed both his father's body and their home. Once the inferno was underway, Paume turned away, leaving behind the remnants of his past. The following day, Abbas sat in his office, deep in thought, realizing he faced a significant challenge with the upcoming 100-man gate. He was uncertain about how to organize the event effectively, especially with Sir Rakan overseeing things this time. Abbas knew that any failure on his part could lead to serious repercussions. He considered that all 10 major merchant unions would be intensely focused on clearing the gate. Abbas acknowledged that securing an epic or higher tier item was almost guaranteed in a 100-man gate, with the possibility of even obtaining a legendary item if luck was on their side. However, he also recognized that, given the number of guilds participating in this venture, the likelihood of acquiring a legendary item for themselves was slim. Among the guilds participating, the 3 Natasha sisters from the Golden Merchant Union stood out as formidable contenders. Their power was so impressive that it was hard to believe they were merely second circle adventurers. Even the second circle adventurers from the Gafor Merchant Union paled in comparison. When considering the overall talent pool, not just from the Goldrich Merchant Union but from all 10 major merchant unions, it was clear that the adventurers being sent were the cream of the crop. Abbas was acutely aware that his Gafor Merchant Union was significantly outclassed by these elite adventurers. Just then, a knock echoed from Abbas's door. As he called out to ask who dared to disturb him, Sir Rakan entered, catching Abbas by surprise. He immediately greeted Rakan with respect. Sir Rakan took a seat in Abbas's chair and inquired whether Abbas had prepared the list of parties that would be participating in the 100-man gate from their side. Abbas, feeling flustered, apologized, admitting that he had not yet organized it properly. Rakan, taken aback, expressed his surprise at Abbas's oversight, noting that it was unlike him to fall behind on his responsibilities. Rakan then turned to Abbas and asked what he thought about Paume, the new recruit. Abbas replied that while Paume showed considerable talent, there were several factors to consider. He pointed out that, although they recognized Paume's skills, they couldn't overlook the incident when Shev's entire party had been wiped out. That incident made Abbas particularly skeptical. Upon hearing this, Rakan suggested that they should put Paume to the test once again. He mentioned that there happened to be a suitable location to assess Paume's abilities. Rakan advised Abbas to gather all the parties he had considered for participation in the 100-man gate. With a smile, he added that this time there would be many witnesses to determine whether Paume was truly as talented as they believed. A few moments later, Paume and Debo were en route to a different gate, ready to conquer new challenges. However, they weren't going alone, other adventurers would accompany them. Debo, noticing the number of adventurers, felt a surge of happiness and remarked to Paume that they would have plenty of company inside the gate. Just then, one of the adventurers approached them and asked if they were the 5th party. The man then looked at them with disdain and sneered, remarking that they were merely 2 individuals with a slave background. Paume, observing the other adventurers' unfriendly gazes, realized that they would not be welcoming toward him and Debo, given their recent history as slaves. Paume glanced at the adventurers and noticed that, although they weren't vocalizing their thoughts, their disdainful stares communicated a clear message. They believed that slaves like him and Debo would only hinder the other adventurers. El Paume acknowledged that it was typical for experienced parties to harbor such views. As he examined the group more closely, he realized that all the adventurers were either first or second circle mages. He thought to himself that these adventurers were vastly different from Chev's party. They were the real deal and didn't require any bait to tackle the challenges posed by the gate. Abbas stepped forward and addressed the gathered adventurers, stating that now that everyone was present, he would keep his remarks brief. He announced that they would proceed with the test and that he would offer a chance for those who demonstrated their abilities. Confusion spread among the crowd regarding what Abbas meant by that chance. He clarified that successful completion of the test he had arranged would grant them the opportunity to participate in clearing the 100-man gate. Gasps of surprise rippled through the group at the prospect of such a valuable opportunity. Abbas continued, mentioning that he was prepared to offer special treatment, urging everyone to give their best effort in clearing the gate they were about to enter. Meanwhile, El Paume reflected on Abbas's intentions, knowing precisely what the man was aiming to achieve. The adventurers entered the gate, finding themselves in a dense forest. One of the adventurers suggested that they should only gather together when it was time to confront the gate's boss. In the meantime, he proposed that they split up to explore the area, with the plan to regroup when they received a signal. Another adventurer chimed in, declaring that his team would simply eliminate anything in their path and urged everyone to stop wasting time and begin their exploration of the gate. His teammates nodded in agreement, ready to follow his lead. As they walked deeper into the forest, they encountered a single monster. The leader of the group, spotting the creature, announced that it was just one monster and immediately launched a magical attack. When the spell hit, he remarked that it was boring because the monster was too weak. He then ordered one of his subordinates to retrieve the magic stone from the defeated monster so they could move on quickly. However, as the smoke cleared, they were all shocked to see that the monster was still standing, unharmed. The leader was taken aback that his magic had failed to subdue it. Just as he was about to voice his confusion to the team, they suddenly realized they had been surrounded by numerous other monsters, and panic set in as they understood they were in serious trouble. A few moments later, despite the intense battle, they managed to defeat the monsters, though everyone was left feeling exhausted. One adventurer called out to their leader, Dolan, expressing concern that the monsters were stronger than usual and asking what they should do next. After carefully considering the situation, Dolan informed his team that winning based on kill count was no longer feasible. If they continued at this pace, they would exhaust their stamina before achieving anything significant. Dolan then proposed a risky but decisive strategy. They would break away from their alliance and head straight for the boss. This way, they could secure a victory more efficiently. El Paume was already aware that the adventurers were planning to abandon the alliance and rush directly to the boss monster. Meanwhile, Debo urged El Paume to forget about the future and focus on the present, asking for help with the monsters since El Paume had been standing idle, talking without assisting. El Paume replied casually, pointing out that there were only 3 monsters, implying that Debo should be able to handle them on his own. Debo quickly shifted the conversation, telling El Paume that, given what he had just said, they shouldn't be wasting time and needed to move. As they spoke in unison, Debo suggested they should go after the boss monster, while El Paume, on the other hand, insisted they focus on clearing the smaller enemies. Debo was taken aback, confused by El Paume's response. He had assumed they would be going after the boss monster like the other adventurers, so El Paume's focus on the lesser mobs caught him off guard. El Paume then told Debo that the other adventurers were likely thinking the same as him. Instead of following the crowd, El Paume suggested they do the opposite and focus on clearing the trash mobs to rack up more numbers. He explained that killing the boss monsters wasn't the only way to earn a high score, how one dealt with the trash mobs was just as important. El Paume also cautioned that the boss monster was dangerous, the competition would be intense, and they couldn't predict what tricks the other teams might pull. They had to stay vigilant, as anything could happen inside the gate. Debo felt irritated hearing El Paume speak, thinking he always acted like he knew everything, though he couldn't deny that El Paume made a valid point. Sensing Debo's frustration, El Paume then mentioned that he had a bad feeling about the gate they were in, sensing something perilous. Meanwhile, in another part of the gate, Dolan and his team were still exploring. Suddenly, one of his team members called out, announcing that they had discovered an escape gate to leave the area. Upon seeing the escape gate, Dolan thought to himself that he hadn't planned on searching for it until later. However, he realized this was fortunate, as it would provide an easy way out if they found themselves in trouble. He then instructed one of his subordinates to leave markings along the way, ensuring they could quickly find their way back to the escape gate if needed. At that moment, one of Dolan's subordinates, Avante, suddenly burst into loud laughter, surprising Dolan and the rest of the team. Puzzled, Dolan asked Avante what was wrong and why he was being so loud, but Avante wouldn't stop laughing. Concerned, Dolan approached him, grabbed his shoulders, and warned him that the noise could attract monsters. As Dolan turned Avante to face him, he was shocked to see Avante crying and laughing simultaneously, as if he had lost control. To Dolan's horror, the rest of his subordinates also started laughing uncontrollably. It was then that Dolan realized they had all been poisoned by something that induced uncontrollable laughter. Panicking, Dolan quickly covered his mouth and thought that he needed to escape, even if it meant leaving his team behind. As he fled, the boss monster suddenly appeared behind him. Before Dolan could react, the monster unleashed its poison gas. Despite covering his mouth and nose with his hand, it was futile. Dolan was soon affected. He began laughing uncontrollably, just like the others, powerless to stop it. As his laughter echoed through the air, he and his entire team were mercilessly wiped out by the boss monster. In another part of the gate, Paume and Debo continued searching for trash mobs to kill. As they walked, Debo began to realize that Paume hadn't fought a single monster since they entered the gate. While he was lost in thought, a flare suddenly shot up into the sky. Debo quickly pointed it out to Paume, saying, "There's a flare." He then mentioned that while it was agreed they should signal if they found the boss monster, he was surprised that the other adventurers had actually been the ones to shoot the flare first. At that moment, everyone gathered in the area where the flare had been shot. As Paume scanned the group, he noticed that one team was missing. Iburuthan, one of the adventurers, spoke up, addressing the crowd. He announced that since everyone seemed to be present, it was time for him to explain why he had summoned them all there. Iburu then spoke up, informing everyone that Dolan's party had still not arrived. He added that it didn't matter and there was no point in waiting for them, as they had already located the boss monster. Iburu recounted how they had witnessed Dolan's party being completely wiped out by the very creature they were now facing, the infamous mad poisonous mushroom monster. Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd upon hearing that the boss monster was the mad poisonous mushroom. Iburu emphasized that they were in serious trouble, as their party was ill-equipped to confront such a formidable foe. Another adventurer spoke up, insisting that if the boss monster was truly the mad poisonous mushroom, they needed to abandon their hunt and find the escape gate immediately to avoid any further danger. Hearing this, Paume thought to himself that the mad poisonous mushroom monster was the worst possible boss for them to encounter at their current level. The spores it spread made it extremely difficult to approach, which meant they couldn't rely on their numbers to take down the creature. Meanwhile, Debo was calling out Paume's name loudly, but Paume didn't hear him at all, causing Debo to feel frustrated at being ignored. Lost in his own thoughts, Paume was strategizing on how to deal with the boss monster. He realized that if they wanted to take it down, they would need to use ranged attacks. However, he also recognized that weak attacks would barely affect the monster, given its sturdy build and speed. Just then, another adventurer spoke up, informing everyone that unfortunately, the boss monster was blocking the path to the escape gate, making it impossible to escape without confronting it. Debo spoke up confidently, assuring everyone that they needn't be afraid of such a monster. He claimed that Paume, his boss, could take it down with just one of his invincible fire arrows. However, Paume interrupted Debo, telling him to be quiet, which only irritated Debo further. Paume then explained to Debo and the others that they would likely die if they engaged the boss monster without a solid plan. He added that his fire arrows wouldn't even graze the creature. Debo was taken aback by this revelation, shocked that Paume's fire arrows could do no damage. Curiously, he asked Paume why he believed that. Paume explained to Debo that even the regular mobs in the gate were tanky, so it was only logical that the boss monster would be even tougher to damage. One of the adventurers then turned to Iburu, asking what they should do in this situation and how they could quickly find a way to escape the gate. As Ibaru pondered their options, El Paume raised his hand and declared that he was willing to act as bait, if they could offer him 50,000 meso per person. With 30 people in the group, that meant they would have to pay him a total of 1.5 million meso. Debo was taken aback and asked El Paume what he was thinking, as the idea he proposed seemed outrageous. Ibaru then shouted at El Paume, telling him not to be so cocky. He added that while El Paume might be accustomed to using such tactics, those tricks wouldn't work on him. Ibaru emphasized that the boss monster was not one to be easily fooled by bait. He warned El Paume that if they followed through with his plan and he failed to distract the monster, resulting in his own death, the creature would then turn its attention to the other adventurers, leading to their instant demise. Ibaru then told El Paume that slaves like him only served as obstacles at higher levels. He pointed his finger at Debo, reminding El Paume that Debo had yet to awaken, meaning neither of them could act as effective bait. They were simply too weak and would be killed instantly by the monster before the other adventurers could escape. Debo, hearing this, felt a surge of anger. He thought to himself that the other adventurers were really starting to irritate him and had been picking fights with him and El Paume since earlier. At that moment, El Paume interrupted the two, asking Ibaru if he had a better plan than what he had suggested. Ibaru couldn't respond, as he had no plan of his own. Seeing this, El Paume pointed out that if Ibaru had a way to deal with the boss monster, he wouldn't have shot the flare to alert everyone. El Paume clarified that he was wrong in what he had said earlier. Their party consisted of himself, a second circle mage, and Debo, who was now a first circle mage. Debo was shocked and delighted to realize he had already achieved his first circle. El Paume then added that Ibaru was in no position to criticize them, considering his team also consisted of only first and second circle adventurers. Ibaru, upon hearing this, fell silent, as it was indeed true. At that moment, one of the adventurers interrupted El Paume, stating that if he was truly willing to be bait for them, he would agree to pay him. El Paume reassured the adventurer not to worry, confirming he would take on the role of bait as long as they were willing to compensate him. He added that he would collect the payment once they had safely exited the gate, reminding them that if they failed to escape, both he and Debo would simply become sacrifices without gaining anything in return. However, El Paume emphasized that everyone present needed to agree to his proposal, leaving the group in shock. He then instructed everyone to discuss and come to a decision. After a few moments, the boss monster remained near the escape gate, still devouring the remains of an adventurer. Suddenly, a fire arrow shot through the air, striking the monster squarely on the head. El Paume and Debo, standing at a safe distance, had their mouths and noses covered with cloth to protect themselves from the monster's toxic spores. El Paume then informed Debo that they would need to move from their current location as soon as the boss monster noticed them. Debo, confused, asked El Paume why they were doing this. Just then, the boss monster turned its attention to the two and launched itself toward them, prompting El Paume and Debo to begin their retreat. As they retreated, Debo asked El Paume why the monster was so fast despite its enormous size. Just then, one of the other adventurers shouted that they needed to hurry and activate the escape gate before the bait was killed. They quickly activated the escape gate, successfully allowing most of the group to escape. Meanwhile, El Paume and Debo continued to flee from the boss monster, facing attacks from smaller monsters in front of them. Debo, feeling furious, shouted at the smaller creatures, insisting they shouldn't underestimate him. In a burst of anger, he swung his weapon, effortlessly slashing through all the smaller monsters with a single blow. At that moment, the boss monster was poised to deliver a devastating attack on Debo, but El Paume managed to block its strike and retaliated with a fire arrow to thwart the monster's advance. He began spamming fire arrows to keep the creature at bay, but with each passing second, the monster drew closer. Just as it was about to unleash another powerful attack, Debo and El Paume leapt off a nearby cliff into the water below, narrowly avoiding the blow. For the time being, they had escaped the monster, drifting along with the current of the water. A few moments later, El Paume and Debo reached the shore, and Debo, still catching his breath, told El Paume that he thought he was going to die at the hands of the boss monster. Curious, Debo asked El Paume what kind of creature it was. El Paume replied that it was the boss monster of the area and emphasized that they needed to prepare more thoroughly if they were going to take it down. Debo, surprised by El Paume's determination, asked if they were really planning to kill the boss monster. El Paume affirmed confidently that they were. El Paume then reassured Debo that he shouldn't worry, as they had originally come to hunt the boss monster. Debo replied that while they did intend to kill the boss, discovering it was the mad poisonous mushroom had given him second thoughts. He suggested that they should call for a tactical retreat. El Paume informed Debo that once they escaped the gate, they wouldn't be able to re-enter. Debo, feeling annoyed, snapped back that he was already aware of that. At that moment, Debo thought they should escape from the gate now, as they were done being bait for the other adventurers. He wondered how they were supposed to defeat the boss monster when even El Paume's fire arrows had proven ineffective. Moreover, El Paume had just mentioned that they would die if they attempted to fight the monster, leaving Debo confused about their next steps. El Paume then interrupted Debo's thoughts, stating that the situation had changed. Since the other adventurers had all escaped the gate, it was now a free opportunity for him and Debo to claim the rewards from the gate. El Paume added that they would also receive a bonus, making it a great opportunity for both of them. El Paume then noticed Debo's hesitation and asked what was bothering him, questioning whether Debo was considering breaking their contract. After a brief pause, Debo assured El Paume that he wasn't thinking of that at all. He expressed his determination to go through with it, adding that El Paume was going to give him a bonus for completing the mission together. With a smile, El Paume confirmed that he would indeed reward Debo. However, Debo then voiced his concern about how they could possibly kill the boss monster when both melee and ranged attacks had proven ineffective. He insisted that he had no intention of throwing his life away on an impossible task. Debo then asked El Paume if there was any feasible way to defeat the monster. Near the exit gate, the other adventurers burst out, panting heavily from their frantic escape. Abbas, standing outside the gate, was taken aback by the rapid emergence of the adventurers. After all, it was a 40-man gate that was meant to pose a significant challenge. He approached one of the adventurers, Juber, who had just exited, and inquired about their experience inside the gate. He also noted that several individuals were still unaccounted for. Juber grimly replied that they had failed to clear the gate. He added that Dolan's party had been completely wiped out and that El Paume's party was still inside. Juber explained that they had been able to escape only because El Paume and Debo acted as bait for the rest of the group. Juber added that the boss of the gate was impossible to defeat with just their numbers alone. Abbas, annoyed by this revelation, questioned them sharply, asking if they had done nothing inside the gate and simply fled with their tails between their legs. Juber attempted to justify their actions, explaining that the boss of the gate was the notorious mad poisonous mushroom, and there was nothing they could do to overcome such a formidable monster. Hearing this, Abbas decided to return to his office, but Juber called out to him, urging him to stop. He pointed out that El Paume and Debo had yet to emerge from the gate, and since it was still active, it meant that the two of them might still be alive. Abbas firmly told Juber that the two of them wouldn't survive, it was only a matter of time. After all, Juber had already pointed out that the boss monster of the gate was the mad poisonous mushroom, which left no hope for El Paume and Debo to escape alive. Abbas added that if Juber wanted to wait for El Paume and Debo, he was free to do so, but Abbas had no time to waste on those he was certain would perish. At that moment, Juber was left speechless, unable to counter Abbas's grim assessment. At that moment, Abbas regarded the adventurers as utterly useless. He believed that El Paume and Debo were merely fortunate in their previous expeditions, and the idea of a two-circle mage like El Paume defeating a mad poisonous mushroom was laughable. It was clear to him that their chances of success were slim to none. Abbas decided he had no use for adventurers like them, thinking it might be better for El Paume and Debo to perish inside the gate. He longed for adventurers who could rise to challenges, those who could turn the impossible into the possible. With this thought weighing on his mind, Abbas returned to his office. Meanwhile, inside the gate, the boss monster continued to roam, searching relentlessly for El Paume and Debo. At a distance, El Paume was charging his fire arrows, preparing to strike the boss monster. He turned to Debo and declared that it was time to begin the hunt. As he released the fire arrow, El Paume reflected on how the boss monster was faster and sturdier than any he had faced before. To make matters worse, its poisonous attacks added an extra layer of difficulty to the battle. In light of these challenges, Paume decided that it was best to maintain their distance and unleash a barrage of overwhelming ranged attacks. Although Paume understood the need for greater power, he knew he couldn't yet achieve that level with the fire arrows he could currently conjure. However, he believed that using telekinesis to spin the arrow at high speed would significantly enhance its piercing effect. This technique was unique to him, born from his inspiration of a bullet, and he had named the skill, revolver. At that moment, the fire arrow, much stronger and faster than its predecessors, struck the boss monster directly near its shoulder, creating a massive hole in its body. Paume noted that he had aimed for the head, which housed the monster's core, but he realized he had slightly missed, making the situation even more troublesome. Just then, the monster charged at Paume, who managed to fire another fire arrow, though it missed the target. He thought to himself that using the revolver technique while on the move was quite challenging, and the main issue was its cooldown. He needed to finish this fight quickly before the boss caught up to him. As the monster charged toward Paume, Debo had already set a trap in its path. When the monster entered the designated area, Paume signaled to Debo. In response, Debo pulled the rope tied between two trees, causing the monster to stumble and fall into the muddy ground. Seizing the opportunity, Debo hurled his polearm at the boss monster, inflicting significant damage. As Debo observed the monster, he noticed that its pores, which released poison, were now clogged with mud. This realization boosted his confidence, and he felt he could breathe a little easier, enjoying the refreshing air around him. Taunting the boss monster, he declared that it was time to begin the fight. Paume stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the monster, and thought to himself that the conditions had finally been met. The core of their mission was to lure the monster into the swamp area, as the fundamental strategy of the hunt was to neutralize the prey's strengths. By doing this, they could nullify the monster's most potent weapon, its poisonous gas. Meanwhile, Debo taunted the monster, asking what was wrong with it and if it was feeling frustrated that all the holes on its face were now clogged with mud, rendering it unable to release its poisonous gas. With that, Debo unleashed a flurry of relentless attacks on the monster, inflicting significant damage. Paume, however, reminded himself that luring the monster to the swamp served a purpose beyond just blocking its poison holes. For a swift creature like the mad poisonous mushroom, the muddy swamp was its worst nightmare, as it couldn't utilize its speed effectively in such terrain. Seizing the opportunity, Paume unleashed his evolved fire arrows, now known as the revolver, and aimed directly for the monster's head. Debo, wondering if the monster was dead from the strike, was abruptly interrupted by Paume, who shouted at him to aim for the core located near the monster's head. At that moment, Debo hurled his polearm at the monster's head, but the creature managed to catch it, yanking Debo along with it. Quick on his feet, Paume employed his telekinesis to hurl a log of wood at the monster, successfully blocking its attack on Debo. Debo swiftly retreated, and as the monster struggled to locate him, Paume raised a wall of water around them to obscure the creature's vision. Seizing the opportunity, Debo approached from behind the monster and, with a swift motion, used his polearm to cleanly sever the creature's head from its body. After delivering the fatal blow, Debo looked up at Paume and gave him a thumbs up, signaling that he had completed the task. Paume smiled back, proud of Debo's accomplishment. However, their moment of triumph was abruptly interrupted when the headless boss monster launched a powerful attack toward Debo, sending him crashing to the ground. Confused and shocked, Paume struggled to comprehend what had just happened. He had been certain that the monster was defeated. As the reality of the situation sank in, Paume realized he must have overlooked something critical. At that moment, the headless monster began to climb the cliff toward him. Debo quickly got to his feet and shouted in frustration that the monster was really starting to annoy him. Fueled by rage, he unleashed his slash burst move, slicing through half of the monster's body. Yet, despite the significant damage, the boss monster continued its relentless climb toward Paume, determined to kill him. As it ascended, Paume noticed a gaping hole in the monster's body, revealing its true head hidden inside. Grateful for the monster's inadvertent guidance, Paume took aim and fired his revolver directly at the exposed head, killing the creature instantly. As the monster exploded, it released a torrent of poisonous gas into the air, prompting Debo to think that even in death, the creature was still a nuisance. Reacting swiftly, Paume used telekinesis to pull Debo away from the toxic cloud. Breathing heavily, Debo asked Paume if it was truly over, to which Paume replied affirmatively, praising Debo for his performance. He suggested they retrieve the mana stone once the poison cleared. Just then, to their shock, the monster re-emerged in the sky, its core still intact, and unleashed a massive cloud of poisonous gas into the atmosphere. Back in the head office, Rakan chuckled upon seeing Abbas return. He remarked that Abbas's temper hadn't changed a bit. Abbas, apologizing for the situation, suggested they send the Cygna's knights to handle the matter. Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Abbas, irritated, instructed the person outside not to disturb them and to go away. However, the individual insisted on entering. Curiosity piqued, Abbas wondered who would dare defy his orders, only to be taken aback when he saw that it was none other than Paume himself. With a serious expression, Paume announced his return, while Rakan grinned with excitement, sensing he had stumbled upon something intriguing in Paume. At that moment, Rakan called out to Abbas, asking what was happening, as he was surprised to see Paume, whom he had thought dead, standing before them. Grinning, Rakan turned to Paume, expressing his pleasure at finally meeting him and introducing himself. He then remarked that Paume's survival skills were as impressive as the rumors had suggested and added that Paume was exactly the kind of person they needed in Gafor at that moment. Upon hearing this, Paume bowed and expressed gratitude to Rakan for the compliment. Pleased with Paume's politeness, Rakan smiled and mentioned that he had one question to ask. He then inquired whether Paume would be able to demonstrate his abilities once again in the upcoming 100-man gate. Paume replied that it would be difficult, surprising Rakan with his response. Abbas, hearing this, became furious and chastised Paume, reminding him that this was no way to speak to Rakan. He added that he hadn't helped Paume become an adventurer just so he could pick and choose his missions. Rakan then reminded Paume that he still had a debt to repay to Abbas. However, despite Paume's reply, Rakan noted that although he had said it would be tough, he hadn't said it was impossible. With a knowing look, Rakan understood what Paume truly wanted. Rakan then told Paume he would rephrase his question and asked what Paume wanted in exchange for participating in the mission. Later, inside a bar, Debo, shocked, spilled his drink upon hearing that Paume had demanded 5 million meso per person for the 100-man gate. He exclaimed that 5 million was far too much for one person. Meanwhile, Paume, glaring at Debo in anger, was drenched in the drink Debo had spilled onto his face. Realizing what he'd done, Debo quickly apologized to Paume. Debo then asked Paume if he wasn't being too greedy, adding that the offer would likely be declined. He also reminded Paume that if they participated in the 100-man mission, it would be their first big task in a while. Paume, unfazed, replied that this wasn't his concern and that Rakan would be the one to make the final decision. Frustrated, Debo told Paume he shouldn't act so indifferent after creating such a huge mess, warning that if the deal fell through, Abbas would blacklist both of them, ruining their lives. At that moment, Ibaru approached them from behind and remarked that Paume and Debo seemed much more relaxed than he and his team, who felt as if they were on the verge of death. Debo, irritated by the comment, turned to Ibaru and demanded to know what he had just said, adding that this was no way to thank the people who had just saved his and his team's lives. Debo then admitted that he hadn't liked Ibaru since the day they first met and, in a burst of frustration, challenged Ibaru to put aside their ranks and settle things with a fight. Just as tensions rose, Ibaru and his team suddenly bowed to Paume and Debo, offering a sincere apology. Debo, caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events, stood there in surprise. Ibaru admitted to Paume and Debo that he had misjudged their abilities and had doubted their skills. Ashamed of himself as an adventurer for doing so, he apologized on behalf of his team for their actions. Ibaru then pulled out a bag and handed it to Debo, explaining that it contained the promised amount for 30 people, totaling 1.5 million meso. He added that everyone had pitched in a little extra as a gesture of gratitude. Still taken aback by the situation, Debo accepted the bag and thanked Ibaru and his team for fulfilling their promise. Paume, upon hearing Ibaru's offer, calmly told him that the extra money wasn't necessary, stating that he only wanted the agreed-upon sum of 1.5 million meso. He then added that he was simply doing the job he was paid to do, so there was no need for gratitude toward him or Debo. Debo, frustrated by El Paume's response, felt irritated, having gotten excited over the extra money only for El Paume to refuse it. Inside his office, Abbas told Rakan that he disagreed with El Paume's request, stating that 10 million meso for El Paume and Debo was excessive. He added that such an amount was typically reserved for third or fourth circle adventurers, not for them. Abbas then informed Rakan that while El Paume might be the best candidate for participating in the 100-man gate, accepting his terms could set a bad precedent. He suggested that El Paume might simply be testing the waters and that it would be wise to call him back for a discussion about the pay. Rakan, surprised by this, asked Abbas if that was truly the case, noting that it wouldn't be unusual for El Paume to request twice the amount. Abbas was taken aback by Rakan's comment. Rakan handed Abbas a letter and urged him to read it. The letter stated that the Gafor Merchant Union would only be sending El Paume's party to participate in the 100-man gate. As Abbas read, he wondered to himself what just two people could accomplish at the 100-man gate. However, as he continued reading, he was shocked by the contents of the letter. He turned to Rakan and asked if the information was accurate. Rakan confirmed that it was true, explaining that he had obtained the information by paying a substantial sum of money. He then emphasized to Abbas that he should not be mistaken and added that the war had already begun. A few moments later, inside the 100-man gate, adventurers were preparing to enter. At that moment, El Paume and Debo arrived, and Debo expressed his surprise that the Gafor Merchant Guild had agreed to their terms. El Paume cautioned Debo not to get too excited and to focus on their current situation. Debo, in response, reassured El Paume that he was also an experienced adventurer now. As they conversed and walked, other adventurers began to take notice of El Paume and Debo. Debo remarked on the different atmosphere, but as he spoke, another adventurer approached and announced to everyone that there were new faces, pointing at El Paume and Debo. The adventurer then asked the two if they were adventurers from the Gafor Merchant Union, adding that it was nice to meet El Paume and Debo. He introduced himself as Sheldon, an E-class adventurer from the Genis Merchant Union. In response, El Paume introduced himself, stating that he was a C-class adventurer. Sheldon was taken aback by this revelation and expressed his surprise, mentioning that he had thought only first or second circle adventurers could enter the gate due to the restrictions. He was astonished to see a C-class adventurer present. At that moment, a woman approached and told Sheldon to give her some space, as she had business to discuss with El Paume. Realizing that El Paume was already engaged with her, Sheldon became irritated and walked away, remarking that it was a waste of time to talk to El Paume. In a flashback to the past, El Paume was in Abbas's office, where he asked Abbas why he needed to team up with another guild. At that moment, Abbas instructed El Paume to simply follow his orders and not ask too many questions. He explained that El Paume and Debo, as members of the Gafor Merchant Union, would be collaborating with the Cygna's Night Order for the 100-man gate. Abbas then explained to El Paume that the quota for the gate had already been filled by adventurers from other merchant unions, which was why they had decided to collaborate with the Cygna's Night Order. He added that even though they were just trainee knights, their chances of successfully completing the 100-man gate would be higher. Abbas acknowledged that the Cygna's Night Order might have ulterior motives for participating, but he believed that their offer to the Gafor Merchant Union was reasonable. He concluded that it would be more beneficial for the two groups to work together. Upon hearing that, El Paume told Abbas that he understood the situation and remarked that cooperation should not be difficult. However, Abbas cautioned him that it would not be as easy as he thought, expressing his feeling that there was something off about the Cygna's Night Order. Back in the present, the woman introduced herself to El Paume as Kiri and explained that she would be leading the trainees of the Cygna's Night Order. Kiri then warned El Paume not to assume they were of the same status simply because she had spoken to him. She made it clear that she wanted to avoid any additional trouble, instructing El Paume to listen to her words and follow her directions quietly. Debo, observing Kiri's attitude toward El Paume, felt irritated by her behavior. Kiri then asked El Paume if he and Debo were the only representatives sent from the Gafor Merchant Union. El Paume confirmed that it was indeed just the two of them. Upon hearing this, Kiri thought to herself that the Gafor Merchant Union might have completely given up on the gate by sending only 2 adventurers. At that very moment, members of the Dig Merchant Union and Merdia Merchant Union arrived, causing the atmosphere to shift dramatically. Debo was taken aback by the presence of these adventurers. At that moment, the 3 Natasha sisters from the Goldrich Merchant Union made their entrance. As soon as they arrived, an adventurer stepped forward and announced that everyone was now present. He introduced himself as Lonko and explained that he and his team were the chosen ones, tasked with providing support while the rest of the adventurers exited the gate. Lonko added that although everyone might have already heard this from their respective unions, he would explain it once more. He emphasized that any legendary item that emerged from the gate would not belong to the adventurers, even if they were the ones to obtain it. Lonko continued by stating that the rights to the items belong to their respective merchant unions and that the adventurers present would be compensated according to the terms they had agreed upon. He informed the adventurers that, although they would not be able to keep the legendary items for themselves, they would still be allowed to keep all the mana stones they obtained from the gate. Lonko then smiled and told everyone that if anyone was caught trying to pocket an item, they would have to face off against his party, which consisted of B-class adventurers. Debo, glancing at Lonko's arm, was shocked to see that he already had 5 circles marked on his hand. This made Debo increasingly worried as he observed Lonko's party, realizing just how strong they truly were. After making his announcements, Lonko informed everyone that they were now allowed to enter the gate. At that moment, Kiri instructed El Paume to follow her, stating that she would be leading the party and that they would be the ones to succeed and conquer the gate. Debo, feeling annoyed by Kiri's demeanor, turned to El Paume and asked what was wrong with her. He also questioned whether they really had to work with someone like Kiri. El Paume, on the other hand, did not hear what Debo was saying. He was lost in his own thoughts. At that moment, he reflected that the time had finally come, and he realized that all his previous efforts, which he had worked so hard to achieve, were ultimately for this moment, to enter the 100-man gate. El Paume thought to himself that the 100-man gate was an experience he had not had in his previous life. Now that he was given the chance to enter, he felt he must succeed no matter what, as everything would start from this gate. He understood that succeeding in this mission would greatly benefit him in the future. At that moment, El Paume told Debo that they should enter the gate. Meanwhile, Debo, still irritated by Kiri's attitude, declared that he would not help Kiri and her team even if they came to him and El Paume crying later. A few moments later, all the adventurers were inside the gate, and Debo asked El Paume why the grass was so tall, as he couldn't see anything because of it. At that moment, Kiri interrupted Debo, reminding him that they were not there for sightseeing and instructing him to keep up with the rest of the team. Debo, feeling irritated, turned to El Paume and asked if they were really going to accept this treatment from Kiri. However, when he looked at El Paume, he noticed that El Paume was preoccupied with something else. Debo then asked El Paume what he was doing. El Paume, at that moment, pressed one side of his face to the ground, listening intently. He could hear something approaching them. After a few moments, one of the adventurers announced that he also heard something coming at a fast pace. Just then, everyone caught sight of the ribbon pigs charging toward them. There were at least over 1,000 ribbon pigs stampeding in their direction. Kiri immediately instructed everyone to spread out to avoid being trampled by the approaching monsters. Everyone was in a state of panic, running in all directions to escape the charging monsters. As they fled, Kiri informed one of her team members that the situation was favorable for them, as they could lure the monsters into a more obstructed area for hunting. However, the team member pointed out a significant issue: the Gafor Merchant Union members were missing. Kiri, upon hearing this, was shocked by the situation. In a different location, Debo informed El Paume that the area they were in felt refreshing and suggested they could relax now. Debo then asked El Paume how he had been able to anticipate the stampede of the ribbon pigs. El Paume explained that, based on his experience, many herds of beasts traveled across the plains they were currently in. El Paume then explained that ribbon pigs had an average body length of 2 meters and were known for their violent personalities. They typically traveled in groups ranging from hundreds to sometimes even thousands. While they were tough monsters to deal with, they were not impossible to hunt, and El Paume noted that the same applied to the members of the other merchant unions. However, He thought to himself that the rest of the adventurers would likely try to avoid fighting, as they did not want to waste their energy so early in the gate. Since no one knew what other monsters they might encounter inside the gate, it was unlikely that the challenge would end with just a few ribbon pigs. As a result, the adventurers would want to avoid fighting weaker monsters as much as possible to conserve their energy. Paume, at that moment, recalled that before his regression, the raid at the Sleepywood 100-man gate had ended in failure, resulting in the deaths of all the adventurers. Debo, noticing that Paume was lost in thought, asked him what he was thinking about. Just as Debo was about to ask his question, he accidentally stepped on a hidden trap, triggering it. Sharpened logs flew toward Debo, but he narrowly dodged them thanks to Paume, who quickly pulled him back just in time. Debo was shocked to discover that there was a trap inside the gate and wondered who had set it. In another area inside the gate, a group of adventurers from the Dig Merchant Union was also encountering traps. However, they managed to handle them easily and without any issues. One of the adventurers, named Babel, remarked that the traps were quite childish after successfully dealing with them. Meanwhile, another adventurer announced to the group that he had finished clearing all the traps in their vicinity. Crocos, the leader of the group, cautioned Babel not to let his guard down, even after they had removed all the traps. He emphasized that while the traps may seem small, they were still dangerous enough to kill someone instantly. Crocos noted that the enemies had adopted human hunting methods, indicating that they were not just ordinary monsters. He deduced that if the monsters possessed this level of intelligence, they must be hob monsters. Crocos explained that hob monsters were significantly more challenging to deal with and were equivalent to boss monsters in a red gate. With this information, Crocos informed his team that they now had a clearer understanding of what to expect. Crocos then stated that the difficulty of this gate was high and that everyone would meet their end without realizing it if there were no adventurers of his caliber around. He urged his team to take advantage of their current situation and knowledge, instructing them to follow him closely. Crocos emphasized that they should not leave anything behind. However, as he turned to his team, he was horrified to see that all of his team members had been beheaded. Before he could react to the situation, Crocos himself was also decapitated in an instant, unable to defend himself or comprehend what was happening. Back with Paume and Debo, Paume was contemplating the identity of the person who had used the ribbon pigs to distract the adventurers entering the gate. He reflected that he had no knowledge of who had devised this strategy, but it had worked out in his favor, allowing him to separate from the rest of the group. This presented a valuable opportunity for Paume to begin implementing the plan he had devised. In a different area, a man stood beside the three Natasha sisters, who were immobilized and unable to move. He expressed that the situation was bothersome but acknowledged that he was pressed for time and needed to get started. Narisha, the eldest of the three sisters, attempted to move her body, but the mysterious man informed her that it was futile, as he had cast a spell that rendered them immobile for the next 30 minutes. Impressed by Narisha's ability to speak despite being under his magic, the man listened as she questioned him about his motives for doing this. The mysterious man then told Narisha that he would eliminate her immediately, as she appeared to be a threat. In an instant, he killed her on the spot, leaving her two sisters in shock and fear at the sight of their siblings' demise. After dispatching Narisha, the man contemplated her earlier question and addressed the remaining sisters, stating that it was a difficult question to answer. As the sisters panicked, he activated his magic and informed them that he was carrying out these actions for Sir Black Magician. At that moment, he launched a fire arrow at both sisters, incinerating them instantly. After killing them, the mysterious man, William, thought to himself that there seemed to be no end to this and that he really wanted to just laze around. As he contemplated this, he recalled what his superior had told him. His superior had called out his name and informed William that they had waited quietly for a long time for the right moment, and it was finally here. The superior added that they had been hiding, growing their strength, and spreading their influence, and now it was time to reap the fruits of their labor. William responded that he would not let him down. At that moment, his superior handed William a mysterious item and instructed him to use it wisely for his next mission, emphasizing that failure would not be tolerated. Returning to the present, William reminded himself that it could not be helped and that it was now time for him to get serious and complete the mission assigned to him. Moments later, night fell, and Paume and Debo found themselves near the base of the hob monsters. Debo, observing the monsters, was taken aback by what he saw and asked Paume if it was true that all the monsters present were boss monsters. Paume, looking slightly annoyed, reminded Debo that he had already explained earlier that there was only one boss among all the hob monsters. He added that the hob monsters had high stamina and were innately strong, making it very risky to face even one of them. Furthermore, Paume noted that the hob monsters had looted items from fallen adventurers, which would complicate matters even more, as some variants could use skills through those items. Debo, shocked by the revelation, expressed to Paume that the hob monsters resembled an army of adventurers, given their ability to wield the weapons of fallen adventurers. He found it hard to believe that they would face such formidable monsters with only the two of them. Debo insisted that it would be impossible for them to confront all the monsters alone and suggested regrouping with Kiri to improve their chances against the hob monsters. Paume, surprised by this change of heart, questioned Debo about why he wanted to collaborate with Kiri after previously stating that he preferred to work separately from her. Upon hearing Paume's questions, Debo explained that he hadn't anticipated facing such powerful monsters and acknowledged that the situation had changed. He insisted that it would be impossible for just the two of them to confront these foes, so they needed to team up with Kiri. However, moments later, Debo found himself attacking a hob monster from behind, clearly irritated by Paume's reluctance to cooperate with Kiri. As Debo mulled over the situation while continuing his assault on the hob monster, the creature suddenly launched a powerful attack toward him, but Debo managed to dodge it effortlessly. Debo positioned himself behind the hob monster and swung his axe, declaring that it was over for the creature. Just as he was about to finish it off, the hob monster managed to dodge his attack, leaving Debo momentarily surprised. In that instant, the hob monster countered with a powerful blow, sending Debo flying backward. Although Debo was still unhurt, he felt frustrated that it was taking him so long to defeat the monster. However, after a few moments, the hob monster lay lifeless on the ground, and Debo had finally finished it off. As Paume approached, Debo remarked that he had expected Paume to come to his aid, but he realized he was mistaken. Paume, upon hearing Debo's remark, noted that it seemed Debo could handle the monster alone. He added that, thanks to his lack of intervention, Debo now understood that hob monsters were not impossible to defeat. However, Debo remained irritated by the situation, and just as he was about to voice his frustration, he spotted something on the ground that left him shocked. There lay the lifeless bodies of the Cygna's knights, their heads severed from their bodies. Debo turned to Paume and asked what had happened. As they approached the scene, Debo alerted Paume to a survivor. Paume moved closer to the survivor and inquired about the events that had transpired, asking if they had been attacked by a hob monster. The survivor then explained to Paume that it was not the hob monsters responsible for the deaths of the Cygna's knights but rather a group of individuals engaged in trolling. Trolling referred to the act of entering unknown gates that others could not access, with the sole purpose of gathering information and attacking other adventurers. Since the gate would disappear once they escaped, all evidence of their wrongdoing would vanish along with it. This time, the battle ended without a clear winner. With their energy drained and their manpower reduced, clearing the difficult gates seemed almost impossible. Even if they managed to secure a unique item within, the suspicions of those outside would be unavoidable. Abbas started to question the motives behind the attack, wondering if the real target was the merchant union's elite. Yet, this line of thinking seemed flawed. If their goal was indeed to eliminate these key figures, the consequences would be severe. Any such move would risk sparking a full-scale war with the other merchant unions, a risk far too great for any sensible merchant faction to take. Abbas began to suspect there might be a larger purpose behind this situation, something more complex than it appeared. Turning back to Paume and Debo, Debo asked Paume if Kiri might be the traitor. Paume replied that it was possible, as he hadn't seen her anywhere nearby. The lone survivor, Pidon, slammed his fist against the ground in frustration, admitting to Paume and Debo that this was his fault. He had never imagined there would be a traitor in his team, much less that it could be Kiri herself. Paume, puzzled, asked Pidon why Kiri, a member of the Cygna's knights, would betray them. Pidon replied that he couldn't fully understand it either and admitted he was still struggling to process the truth. Reflecting on it, though, he recalled that some of her orders at the gate entrance seemed calculated, almost as if part of a larger scheme. Before she left, she had even mentioned it herself. Kiri was a follower of the Black Magician. Paume listened intently to Pitten, while Debo was shocked to learn that Kiri was a follower of the Black Magician. This Black Magician, a transcendent who had terrorized the Maple World 800 years ago, amassed a vast following and threatened the realm's very existence. In response, 6 legendary heroes rose to the challenge, ultimately turning the tide by sealing both the Black Magician and his forces. With their leader sealed and his followers in disarray, the allied forces managed to push back, clearing the Maple World of the Black Magician's influence. Paume thought to himself that everyone in the Maple World knew this story. Still processing the revelation, Debo struggled to accept that Kiri could be involved with the Black Magician's legacy. Just then, Paume cut in, reminding them that this was no time to dwell on the monsters. Urging focus, he insisted they needed to find Kiri before it was too late. Paume then asked Pitten if he was prepared to join them and warned him to be ready for a fight when they confronted Kiri. Pitten, determined, responded that this was exactly what he wanted. Meanwhile, in a different area, Kiri continued running until she came to a sudden stop. Standing before her was none other than William. He greeted her with a smirk, saying he had been waiting for her. Noticing the signs of her recent battle, he commented that it seemed she had taken care of the ribbon pigs herself. William went on to say that splitting everyone up had made their plan far easier to execute and, now, he could finally bring it all to a close. With a smug tone, William asked Kiri if she was enjoying the gift he had left her. Irritated, Kiri demanded to know who he and his men really were, her patience wearing thin. Meanwhile, Paume and Debo moved forward with Pitten trailing behind. Debo suggested they could slow down if Pitten was in pain, mentioning that Paume had already gone on ahead, so they didn't need to rush. Pitten thanked Debo but assured him that he was fine. Debo then encouraged him, saying that Paume was excellent at tracking, and he was confident they would find Kiri soon. Hearing this, Pitten quietly drew his sword, muttering that it was good to hear. In another area, Kiri was still locked in a fierce battle with William's men. Observing her strength and skill, William remarked that it was impressive how she could hold her ground against so many opponents alone. He added that this level of prowess was only natural for a training captain of the Cygna's Knights. William taunted Kiri, questioning how long she could keep up the fight. Just then, Kiri summoned her power, activating her Rising Sun skill. One of William's men lunged at her, telling her to drop the act, but in a swift motion, Kiri unleashed Solar Slash, slicing through him and ending the confrontation. Breathing heavily from exertion, she demanded that William state his purpose, warning that he'd end up dead if he didn't. Unfazed, William called her noisy and ordered his remaining men to finish her off. The 3 men charged at Kiri simultaneously, weapons poised. But just as they moved into attack, each of them was instantly slashed apart. Both Kiri and William were stunned by the sudden turn. Kiri turned in the direction of the strike and was surprised to see Debo standing there. Earlier, Debo and Pitten were still making their way forward, with Debo reassuring Pitten that Paume was excellent at tracking and would likely find Kiri soon. Just then, Pitten's expression changed as he discreetly drew a knife. Turning to Debo with a sinister smile, Pitten said, "Give Kiri my regards when you see her," and swung the knife toward him. But before the blade could reach Debo, Pitten's hand was blasted apart by a fireball from Paume. Stunned, Debo turned to Paume, asking what was happening. Paume replied calmly that things were exactly as he'd suspected, and he smirked at Pitten, calling him a terrible actor. Pitten, clutching his injured hand, realized the situation had turned against him. Paume, observing Pitten's distress, remarked that he hated to break it to him but had long ago stopped trusting others so easily. In that moment, Paume activated his spell, swiftly finishing Pitten off. In the present, William rose to his feet, looking at Debo and Kiri with an irritated smirk, remarking how odd it was to see an uninvited guest suddenly appear. One of his subordinates informed him that Debo was from the Gafor Merchant Union and noted that Debo's survival meant Pitten had failed to eliminate the rest of their group. William sighed, commenting that he had even given Pitten a chance to redeem himself after losing track of Kiri. Perhaps, he mused, leaving the rest of the cleanup to Pitten had been a mistake. Annoyed by the situation, William remarked that this was becoming troublesome and ordered his elites to handle Kiri and Debo, noting that they both appeared stronger than expected. Kiri quickly warned Debo to stay alert, but Debo seemed unfazed. As William's subordinates closed in, William instructed them to wrap things up quickly. Debo confidently told Kiri to focus on taking down at least one opponent while he handled the others. Kiri reminded him not to let his guard down. William's subordinates attacked Debo in perfect coordination. One of them launched a powerful strike at him, but Debo, smiling and unfazed, dodged with ease and landed a heavy counterattack. Another subordinate tried to catch Debo off guard, but he dodged again. However, a third attacker managed to sneak up from behind, landing a blow that injured Debo slightly, though he remained ready to fight. At that moment, one of William's subordinates unleashed a powerful strike, determined to finish Debo off and taunting him that he'd end his misery. Seeing this, Kiri grew concerned and called out, asking what Debo was doing. Just as the attack was about to connect, Debo dodged skillfully. Maneuvering behind his opponent, smirking, he told Kiri he was merely toying with his prey before swiftly dispatching his foe. The remaining members tried to attack Debo, but their efforts were futile. His strength was overwhelming, and they were stunned by his unexpected power. Meanwhile, Kiri defeated one of William's subordinates as well, remarking that it was disappointing to face such weak opponents. She scoffed, saying she couldn't believe they called themselves elites when they were so unworthy of the title. William's subordinates fumed at Kiri's remarks, their anger palpable in the air. Just then, William interjected, declaring that he could no longer hold back. He warned Debo and Kiri that they had reached the end of the line. With that, he launched a powerful fire arrow, emphasizing that they had already wasted too much of his time. Debo was taken aback by William's ability to cast a fire arrow. As the projectile sped toward him, he realized it was even faster than Paume's spells. The fire arrow detonated near Debo, and with a confident smile, William cautioned him not to underestimate it simply because it was a fire arrow. His flames were on an entirely different level. At that moment, William thought it was over and instructed his subordinates to begin clearing the dungeon. However, as the smoke began to dissipate, he was astonished to see that both Debo and Kiri were unharmed. Even more surprising was the figure standing before him, none other than Paume. William asked Paume who he was, but Paume responded cryptically that there was another guest in addition to him. Suddenly, from the bushes emerged a horde of monsters charging directly at William and his subordinates. Moments later, after a fierce battle, William and his men managed to defeat all the charging creatures. Breathing heavily, William turned to Paume and complained that he was quite troublesome, having thrown something like this at him and his subordinates. William called out to one of his subordinates, Gerald, instructing him that they didn't have time to regroup. They needed to pursue Paume and his team immediately. If Paume escaped through the gate, William would be in serious trouble. As he thought about the situation, William felt a headache brewing, recognizing that Paume was a bothersome individual shrouded in mystery. Gerald then pointed out that there were footprints on the ground. William instructed Gerald that if he encountered Paume, he should just hold him and keep him occupied, as William intended to deal with Paume personally. Gerald hesitated, stating that he didn't think that was necessary. He admitted that he knew he wasn't in a position to question orders, but Paume didn't appear to be a small fry at all. Upon hearing Gerald's concerns, William asked if he understood who he was speaking to and who he was worrying about. He emphasized that within the gate, it was impossible for anyone to be stronger than him, so Gerald didn't need to caution him about anything. Meanwhile, Paume, Debo, and Kiri had just escaped from William. Debo turned to Paume, asking if he had seen the look on William's face. He speculated that he didn't know if William and his subordinates would survive being trampled by the monstrous pigs, but Paume assured him that they wouldn't die so easily. Shifting the topic, Paume warned Debo to watch his step, as there could be traps lying in wait. Debo replied that he was on high alert and had it under control. He then questioned Paume about why he hadn't finished off William and his subordinates while he had the chance, suggesting that Paume could have easily found an opening to use his fire arrow against them. Paume explained to Debo that he couldn't finish off William, because he was stronger than him. Debo was taken aback by this revelation. Paume recalled the fire arrow fired by William, realizing that his own fire arrow had barely deflected its trajectory and hadn't affected it at all. In that moment, Paume understood that he was indeed weaker than William. Debo, still struggling to accept this, insisted that William couldn't possibly be that much stronger and urged Paume to stop joking. However, Paume reassured him that he wasn't making light of the situation. Debo found it hard to believe that they had actually run away due to being weaker than William. Paume then looked at his hand, where the circles were marked, and informed Debo that it appeared the circle had widened to its limit. Debo, not grasping what Paume meant, asked for clarification. Paume explained that the thickness of the circle influenced the speed and power of the magic used, and since he was at the peak of the second circle, they should have been equals or even stronger than William. However, he noted that William's magic surpassed his understanding. Given that William had managed to enter the gate, Paume was certain that he was also a second circle mage, without a doubt. Yet, William had somehow enhanced his skills beyond normal limits. Paume concluded that it would be fair to say that William was the strongest adventurer in the gate at that moment. Debo then asked Paume what they should do about the situation, suggesting they might try the earlier tactic they used with the Hobbs. Paume responded that it wouldn't be that simple, explaining that Hobbs were different from the basic ribbon pigs and could easily realize that he and Debo were enemies, using that knowledge against them. At that moment, Kiri intervened, questioning what the two were discussing and if they understood the gravity of their situation. She emphasized that the crucial point was that a follower of the Black Magician was hiding behind the Cygna's Night, which was significant information that could determine the fate of the Maple World. She urged them to quickly exit the gate and deliver this information. Kiri then told Paume and Debo that they should give up on clearing the gate, but Paume interrupted, insisting that it would be pointless to do so. Furious, Kiri responded that she understood Paume's background as a former slave and realized that his reluctance to leave the gate stemmed from his desire for the reward associated with clearing it. Paume then questioned Kiri about what would happen once they alerted the people outside. He asked her if this was truly the best way to eliminate the followers of the Black Magician and cautioned her not to underestimate them. He explained that the followers had been hiding for hundreds of years, growing their influence in the shadows. Simply exposing them would be like cutting off a branch, failing to address the root of the problem. Paume asserted that they needed to dig deeper to truly confront the threat posed by the followers of the Black Magician. Paume then explained to Kiri that if they chose to hide, no one would be able to locate the followers of the Black Magician. This would allow the followers to become parasites, quietly consuming the Maple World without anyone noticing. Kiri, infuriated by his reasoning, insisted that his approach would not work. She grabbed his collar and demanded to know what their next move would be, warning him not to spout nonsense without a solid plan to back it up. They were being chased, and she emphasized the need to escape before they were discovered. In response, Paume smiled at Kiri and stated that it was time for William and his subordinates to understand who the real hunters were. In a different area, one of William's subordinates was saying that they needed to quickly locate Paume, Debo, and Kiri because if they escaped from the gate, it would spell trouble for them. Just then, Debo suddenly appeared behind them and greeted them before launching an attack at one of the men. Although they managed to dodge the strike, one of the men called Debo foolish for revealing himself and vowed to finish him off. At that moment, one of the traps set up by Paume was triggered, hitting the man directly and dealing significant damage. One of his subordinates shouted a warning, but Debo told the man that he did not have the luxury of looking away. He then delivered a powerful blow to the man, following it up with a relentless barrage of strikes until the man was left unconscious. Another subordinate was taken aback by the unfolding events, but at that moment, Kiri arrived and delivered a powerful blow to the woman, warning her not to look away. Kiri was already irritated with how things were going and was determined not to let the woman escape easily. Meanwhile, William noticed that the fight between his subordinates and the rest of Paume's team had commenced. He addressed the man approaching him, who was none other than Paume, and expressed curiosity about whether they had been waiting for William and his subordinates for a long time. William then let out a menacing laugh and told Paume that it was time to get started. In that instant, both Paume and William activated their spells, unleashing fire arrows at each other. As time passed, the two continued exchanging fire arrows, but then William executed an unexpected sneak attack that startled Paume. Just as Paume dodged the initial attack, William struck from behind, casting a fire arrow spell that hit him directly. However, as the smoke cleared, Paume remained standing, having successfully evaded William's fire arrow. William, surprised and excited by this, asked if Paume had just cancelled his spell, noting that it was unexpected since he was sure Paume lacked the power to block his fire arrow. Curious, William inquired how Paume had managed to dodge his attacks, but Paume remained silent, saying nothing in response. Noticing Paume's silence, William remarked that it seemed Paume wasn't much of a talker. He added that it was fine if Paume didn't want to share, as they couldn't casually chat while engaged in battle. At that moment, William cast another fire arrow and declared that he would figure things out himself. However, just as the fire arrow was about to reach Paume, he activated his revolver spell, overpowering William's attack. Shocked by the strength of Paume's spell, William watched as Paume used telekinesis to spin the arrow, transforming it into a drill that pierced through William's magic, something William had never encountered before. In an instant, Paume's spell struck William directly. Moments later, William remained standing and expressed his disbelief, stating that he hadn't expected Paume to enhance his skills using telekinesis. William acknowledged that he now understood Paume's capabilities, referring to him as one of the so-called geniuses. With a menacing smile, William admitted that Paume was exactly the type he hated the most. At that moment, William launched another fire arrow, declaring that they were going to have more fun and challenging Paume to showcase more of his abilities. In response, Paume used telekinesis to block the fire arrows with nearby rocks. However, William taunted him, questioning what he was doing and suggesting that playing hide-and-seek shouldn't be Paume's only skill. At that moment, Paume used his telekinesis to control one of the fire arrows he had already cast, directing it straight toward William. Although surprised that Paume had cast a fire arrow without him noticing, William managed to dodge the attack. The fire arrows continued to pursue him, and despite his evasive maneuvers, William grew increasingly annoyed. He declared to Paume that the game was over and launched a fire arrow in retaliation. Paume successfully countered it with his revolver spell, but William pressed on with his assault, unleashing poison breath that caught Paume off guard. Moments later, the entire area was engulfed in poison breath, and William addressed Paume, who appeared unaffected by the attack. William remarked that while poison breath was indeed useful, it had left him wide open during its casting. He speculated that if he could force Paume's fire arrows into cooldown, he could effectively seal Paume's attacks for about 30 minutes. William then mentioned that his own fire arrow spell was also on cooldown and apologized to Paume, explaining that he intended to finish him off with his dagger. As William approached Paume, he expressed his excitement, eager to see the look of despair on Paume's face when he realized he was powerless against William. He wondered if Paume would tremble or cry, but to his surprise, Paume launched himself toward William, defying expectations even after being struck by the poison breath. At that moment, Paume delivered a powerful blow to William, sending him flying backward. Reflecting on the past, Ibaru turned to Debo and asked how they had managed to overcome the mad poisonous mushroom's toxin. He reassured Debo that it was fine to share their secret since Paume wasn't around and promised to cover Debo's tab in exchange for the information. Debo chuckled and explained to Ibaru that revealing the secret would be pointless, as it wasn't something anyone could replicate at will. He went on to clarify that Paume had used a spell called Room, a telekinesis skill that could suck and trap air. Just when Debo thought they were finished battling the poisonous mushroom monster, Paume had absorbed all the poison from the large area. Ibaru, frustrated by Debo's response, remarked that what Paume had done was akin to cheating. Debo agreed, adding that Paume was like a cheat character in a game. With a smirk, he told Ibaru that the drinks would be on him since he had provided the answer. Meanwhile, in the present, Paume continued to unleash a flurry of attacks on William. With a powerful strike, he sent William flying backward. Seizing the moment, Paume activated his fire arrow spell and shot it directly at the badly injured William, who was unable to move. The fire arrow struck William's hand, severing it from his body. William screamed in anger, refusing to give up despite the pain coursing through him. He activated his poison breath, but it was immediately absorbed by the rune spell that Paume had cast. Paume realized that while William seemed to be acting insane, he was actually focusing on something specific. With his poison breath ineffective, William might be trying to retrieve his staff. Determined to end William's threat, Paume prepared to strike, but just then, one of the fire arrows cast by William struck him, sending him backward and inflicting significant damage. As Paume struggled to recover, William rose, laughing menacingly. He taunted Paume, declaring that he would tear him into pieces. Paume lay on the ground, regretting that he had let his guard down. He hadn't expected William to have a flame orb as a hidden card spell, and he thought that he would never have made such a mistake before his regression. He lamented that he had lost his edge. At that moment, more flame orbs flew toward him, and a massive explosion erupted. Debo, hearing the explosion, grew worried about Paume. Just then, Kiri arrived and swiftly slashed the head off one of William's subordinates. After dispatching the enemy, she urged Debo to stop playing around and finish off their opponents, noting that Paume was overwhelmed. Debo, furious at her implication, retorted that he had been planning to do just that from the beginning and that she didn't need to order him around. As Debo was speaking, an arrow struck his opponent's eye directly, surprising him. He turned to face the direction from which the arrow had come and saw that it had been shot by the green hobs. Debo then informed Kiri that he had been wondering why the green hobs had not shown up. Upon spotting them, Kiri urged Debo to concentrate and quickly finish things up. As she said this, she pointed out that there was a peculiar green hob among the others. William struck Paume with a powerful spell and wondered if the fight was finally over. Yet, just then, William began coughing up blood, feeling the toll of his own injuries. He laughed, acknowledging Paume's strength, admitting that he had underestimated his opponent, who had pushed him to this breaking point. In that moment, he thought he should have at least asked Paume's name before killing him. Suddenly, Paume's voice rang out, declaring his name with defiant pride. William's eyes widened in shock. Paume was still alive, having survived the spell's full force. Paume declared that William should remember his name well, for it would be the last name he would ever hear. William scoffed, telling Paume he was like a cockroach and wouldn't be able to activate his spell again, having drained all his energy. Paume responded calmly, admitting that he had abandoned the restraint of using only his two-circle spells, knowing it would be nearly impossible to corner William with just that level of power. He then drew out a mana stone and began absorbing its energy. Seeing this, William burst into laughter, calling Paume a madman. He mocked him, saying that absorbing the mana stone wouldn't be enough to elevate him to a three-circle user. True advancement, William explained, required enlightenment gained only through countless experiences. Paume, however, agreed with him, assuring William that he needn't worry, he had already endured enough experiences and reached his own enlightenment. In that moment, another circle appeared on his hand, and William stared in shock at what had just transpired. William charged at Paume, dismissing his claims as mere bluffs. In response, Paume unleashed his fire arrow spell, aiming it directly at William. William countered with his own flame orb, but Paume's fire arrow, now far more powerful after his level up, shattered the flame orb in an instant. The blazing arrow struck William directly, engulfing him in flames and reducing him to ashes. As the fight ended, Paume realized he had forgotten to ask the name of his opponent. Meanwhile, Kiri and Debo were still hiding from the hobs. Debo was badly injured from their previous encounter, and Kiri sensed that their situation was quickly becoming more complicated. Before their current predicament, Debo had been thoroughly enjoying himself as he fought the mobs, counting each kill with satisfaction. By then, he had taken down 17 hobs. Watching him, Kiri thought he was handling the monsters with ease, while Debo silently noted that their attack patterns were simple for him to read. As Debo continued cutting down more monsters, Kiri suddenly noticed the hob leader preparing a spell, and she was startled to see a monster wielding an item. The hob leader unleashed an orbital flame spell, catching Debo off guard and leaving him badly injured, bringing them to the present moment. Kiri still struggled to accept that a monster could use an item, something she had never expected, and she realized that dealing with this would be far more challenging than she had anticipated. Kiri wondered if staying hidden until they could regroup with Paume was their only option, hoping he was still alive. Just as this thought crossed her mind, one of the hobgoblins spotted them and lunged, attempting to grab them both. She narrowly avoided its grasp and, as they fled, Kiri quickly pushed Debo aside to ready herself for a fight. Drawing her sword, she slashed down the closest hobgoblin, killing it instantly. Then, she lifted Debo and continued running. As she carried him, Kiri thought she could manage the hobs one at a time, so long as it wasn't their leader. But just as she considered this, the hob leader unleashed another powerful spell. Toward them, she and Debo dodged it in the nick of time, barely escaping its destructive force. As the smoke cleared, Kiri found herself on the ground, startled to see that Debo was now awake and standing protectively in front of her. Without hesitation, Debo charged toward the hobgoblin leader. The other hobs rushed to intercept him, but he swiftly dispatched them one by one. Seeing Debo drawing closer while decimating its companions, the hob leader grew anxious. It activated its spell and unleashed another orbital flame at him. Kiri, watching Debo's movements, was astonished. She could hardly believe that someone so powerful was still only a first circle mage. Debo dodged the incoming orbital flame spell and, in the same motion, launched a powerful strike at the hobgoblin leader. Although the leader managed to partially block the blow, the impact sent Debo flying backward, leaving the leader badly injured. Furious at the damage Debo had inflicted, the hobgoblin leader immediately prepared another orbital flame spell, aiming this time at both Debo and Kiri. Just as the spell was about to strike them, a powerful counter spell erupted, overpowering and shattering the monster's attack. The counter spell blasted through, obliterating the hobgoblin leader and the remaining hobs in an instant. Kiri was stunned by what she had just witnessed. At that moment, Paume appeared and remarked with a smile that he wasn't too late to lend a hand. Meanwhile, Lonko, one of the guards for the raid, yawned and remarked to the others that 4 days had passed with no sign of those who had entered the gate. He commented that he was glad to earn some easy money for a change, but added that idling around was starting to make him restless. Sitting around didn't suit him at all. He joked that he'd probably decline any future defense missions, but just as he said this, he noticed a commotion near the gate. As he wondered what was going on, the gate suddenly began to destabilize, and within moments, it completely shut down. One of the guards, Kite, quickly suggested that someone should fetch the bishop. Just then, Lonko rushed over, asking Kite for a report on the situation. Kite informed him that a few people had returned alive and, judging by the gate's disappearance, it appeared the gate had been successfully cleared. Hearing this, Lonko went to check on the survivors and was shocked to find 3 adventurers lying on the ground, bruised and badly injured. He hadn't expected anyone to make it back alive. A short while later, Paume regained consciousness in his room. As he opened his eyes, he saw Lonko sitting beside him, keeping watch. Lonko noticed that Paume had regained consciousness and told him so. Confused, Paume asked where he was, but Lonko interrupted, insisting that Paume needed to answer truthfully to the questions he was about to ask. Lonko explained that only Paume, Debo, and Kiri had survived from the Gafor merchants among all the adventurers who had entered the gate. He pressed Paume for details about what had happened inside. Paume was taken aback by the revelation that only 3 of them had made it back alive. As he held his injured arm, he admitted to Lonko that he had suspected something like this might occur, but he hadn't anticipated that so few would return. Lonko warned Paume to answer him properly, or he risked losing the love he had worked so hard to save. Paume then explained that they had encountered a demon inside the gate and asked for a pen and paper to draw the monster's face. He admitted that he didn't know the creature's name, but it was powerful enough to defeat all the adventurers who had entered. As Paume sketched the monster, Lonko immediately recognized the creature he was describing. Meanwhile, representatives from all the guilds that had sent members into the gate gathered inside a tent to discuss the recent events. One of the representatives spoke up, informing the group that a total of 100 people had entered the gate, all aces representing their respective merchant unions. They were shocked to learn that only 3 had returned alive while the others had fallen to the monsters within. Another representative from a different guild remarked that adventurers should have been able to handle the monsters in a red gate without breaking a sweat. Lonko, however, countered that Paume did not appear to be lying. He pulled out the drawing that Paume had made and explained that it depicted the boss of the 100-man gate. As everyone examined the sketch, they were taken aback to see that it was a green hob. At that moment, one of the representatives pointed out that green hobs were monsters capable of using items and that they were so intelligent that engaging them in a large-scale fight would be akin to battling a human army. Another person added that sending only 100 people to face such formidable creatures would have been a daunting task. Just then, Franco, a representative of the Goldrich Merchant Guild, interjected, expressing his disbelief. He stated that he could not accept this outcome and emphasized that, while he was unsure about the others, there was no way his guild member, Nastasha, would fall to a creature like a green hob. Lonko asked Franco to clarify his position, to which Franco responded incredulously, questioning whether Lonko was genuinely asking him, suggesting that Lonko already knew the answer. Franco, wearing a serious expression, addressed the group, suggesting that this entire situation had to be a result of trolling, as none of it made sense without the possibility of someone backstabbing them from within. He questioned whether there was any way to investigate what had happened inside the gate, noting that someone could easily exploit the situation, whether it was premeditated or not. Franco also pointed out that the three survivors seemed to belong to the same group. At that moment, Abbas interjected, stating that he could no longer listen to Franco's accusations. He asserted that there was no way the Gafor representatives would have betrayed everyone and explained that it simply happened that the Gafor merchant side had someone who reached the third circle and survived while the rest of the adventurers did not. Franco, visibly annoyed by Abbas's remarks, challenged him, asking if he was implying that the adventurers from Franco's merchant union were inferior to those of the Gafor merchant union. Abbas replied that regardless of intentions, he was merely stating the facts. Tension rose between them as both men grew increasingly frustrated with each other. Franco countered that if the Gafor truly had many talented individuals, then their merchant union wouldn't be ranked last among the 10 great merchant unions. Annoyed, Abbas retorted that their position was simply due to being new and assured Franco that the Gafor merchant union would soon rise in the rankings. He concluded by advising Franco to keep his seat clean for when that day came. Lonko, appearing unbothered, asked Franco and Abbas if they were finished with their argument. In response, Franco asked Abbas if he had any proof to suggest that Gafor was not the main culprit. Abbas smiled and pointed out that the proof was right in front of everyone. The Gafor merchants had not brought any items out of the gate, indicating they had no motive to annihilate the other adventurers. Moments later, Paume, Debo, and Kiri were feeling much better. Paume bowed his head to Lonko and expressed his intention to leave now that he was feeling well again, thanking Lonko for treating him and his team. Lonko sent them off, reminding them to take care of themselves. As the three departed, Kite, who had been standing next to Lonko, asked if it was acceptable to let them leave so easily. Lonko replied that they had already reached a conclusion, so there was no need to hold the three back. A few moments later, as the three had walked a bit farther, a pet snail suddenly appeared in front of them. Kiri remarked to Paume that the snail had really followed them. Earlier, while they were still inside the gate, Kiri had been asking Paume why he was hesitating, pointing out that they had already dealt with the followers of the Black Magician and had cleaned up the Green Hob and its minions. She suggested that all they needed to do now was dispose of all the items and inflict a bit of harm on each other before making their escape. Despite Kiri's encouragement, Paume continued to hesitate, concerned about an item he had seen earlier that belonged to William. He acknowledged that Kiri was correct in saying they had defeated the boss and should discard the item, but he added that William's item was a phoenix's feather. Holding a phoenix's feather could increase the output of one's fire magic by 30%, and unlike other items that did not stack, this one had effects that could be accumulated. Paume realized why the adventurers had been wiped out by William previously. He had been using this powerful item in his battles. At that moment, Paume thought that this was an unexpected gain and resolved to take the item with him out of the gate no matter what. However, Kiri reminded Paume that if they attempted to take anything out that had not been registered, they would be suspected of trolling. She pointed out that Paume had been the one to remind them of this rule in the first place. Kiri urged him not to be greedy and insisted that they should stick to the plan since they had already located the exit gate. At that moment, as Kiri was speaking, a snail approached the three, and both Paume and Kiri were surprised to see a snail inside the gate. In the present, the snail, known as a pet snail, was different from other snail monsters. It had no attack power but was adept at sniffing out and collecting items. The more items it gathered, the larger its shell became. Paume recalled that this life form appeared after the gate was opened in his previous life. The pet snail then produced something from its shell, revealing 2 phoenix feathers. Paume felt a surge of happiness at the sight of the items. Kiri remarked that Paume had managed to bring out the items he wanted from the gate without getting caught, and she asked how he had known about the snail's abilities. Paume then explained to Kiri that he believed it was better to try for something than to leave empty-handed. Kiri shifted the topic and mentioned that she had followed his instructions, asking what his next plan was. Paume advised her not to rush, reminding her that since they had infiltrated the Cygnus Knights, they needed to be cautious while gathering intel. He warned that if they were not careful, they could end up hiding even deeper, so he suggested they wait until everyone had left. Meanwhile, at a different location, a member of the Black Magician Guild was reporting to his superior that all the members sent into the 100-man gate had been wiped out, concluding that it was a failed raid. The superior was furious upon hearing this news. The subordinate informed his superior that it was reported that the members sent to the 100-man gate had all been defeated by the boss monster, with only 3 individuals from the Gafor making it back alive. He added that during the meeting, the representatives from each guild expressed suspicions of trolling, but the focus of the questioning was on the Gafor members. Fortunately, this line of inquiry was dismissed due to insufficient evidence, which meant that their Black Magician Guild remained undiscovered despite the mission's failure. Hearing this, the superior asked if his subordinates had been caught, and the troubled subordinate replied that the Black Magician members had not been apprehended. The superior informed his subordinate that their plan had been to eliminate all parties and defeat the boss themselves, but the outcome had been the opposite, with 3 members of the Gafor Guild managing to survive. He added that at least one of the 3 must have seen William, yet there was no mention of this in the reports submitted by Paume. The subordinate then questioned whether it was truly necessary to conceal information about William and the Black Magician, noting that even if Paume chose to withhold this information, the Black Magician Guild had operatives within various merchant unions, making it difficult for Paume and the other 2 to identify their specific merchant union. The superior then explained that the reason for the concealment might stem from the realization that the threat was not limited to a single merchant union but rather extended to them, the followers of the individual they answered to, known as Sir Black. The superior added that Paume and the other 2 would be the only ones aware of the return of Sir Black's followers. He then asked his subordinate what would happen if they were to spread this information. Upon hearing this, the subordinate panicked, realizing that such a revelation would put the followers of the Black Magician in danger. He insisted that they needed to eliminate all members infiltrating the merchant unions before the situation spiraled out of control. Meanwhile, Debo reflected on his past, recalling the days when he struggled with poverty and could only dream of living a normal life. He watched helplessly as his sister suffered daily from the black blood disease, unable to provide for his family or give them a proper send-off as he remained locked away in a place that felt like hell. Even though that place had been hell for him, it was also the time when he first encountered Erin. Smiling at Debo, Erin expressed her surprise that someone was still there and remarked that he seemed to be having a difficult time. She offered to help him with his situation. A year passed, and Debo was now enjoying himself as he fought monsters and competed with his team to see who could slay the most. He proudly declared that he was in first place, and his teammates laughed and smiled in agreement. Erin then addressed everyone, noting that everything had been taken care of. She congratulated them and announced that it was time to depart. Debo looked at Erin with a smile on his face and a heart filled with joy, reflecting on how the past year spent with her and the team had transformed his outlook on life. He envisioned a hero who, while not swayed by emotions, was warm-hearted and protective of her people. Erin led the way, forging a path forward, and watching her inspired Debo to see the world through a new lens. As a result, his goal naturally became to support her in any way he could. Moments later, as the group walked and chatted casually, Erin turned to a girl named Shannon and asked if they were heading in the right direction. Shannon examined the markings on the ceiling and confirmed that, based on what she saw, they were indeed on the correct path. At that moment, one of the group members spoke up, expressing that the atmosphere felt different and noting that they had no idea a place like this existed beneath the Ilnaz mountain range. Moments earlier, Shannon had approached Erin, expressing her concerns about the dangers of entering the abandoned mine alone. She explained that no one was willing to accompany her and pleaded for Erin's help in finding her brother, who was lost in the mines. Erin responded by telling Shannon that she had come to the wrong person for such personal requests, emphasizing that the clause stating she must take Shannon along was insufficient. Erin then told Shannon that while she might be a guide on paper, it was important for Shannon to understand that being only a third circle mage made her little more than dead weight. Erin also pointed out that there was no guarantee Shannon's brother was still alive, advising her to seek help from another adventurer. Shannon, on hearing this, was on the verge of tears. Debo then interrupted the two, apologizing for cutting into their conversation. He expressed that they were probably Shannon's last hope, noting that since the previous day, no adventurers had ventured into the Cave of Trials. With strong determination, Debo declared his desire to help Shannon and promised to keep her safe, urging Erin to reconsider her decision. Back in the mines, an unresponsive body lay on the ground, prompting Erin to ask Shannon if it was her brother. Shannon replied that the body did not belong to him. Erin wondered how the person had died in that place, noting that it appeared he had not been killed by a monster and seemed to have been dead for over a week. Just as Shannon was about to say something, they were suddenly attacked. Debo rushed to protect Shannon, puzzled by what had just happened. As he turned to confront the creature that had attacked them, he was surprised to see it was a Zakum. Seeing the monster, Debo instructed Shannon to fall back immediately. At that moment, the rest of the team joined Debo, and he confidently assured them that they would end this quickly. As they fought, Shannon observed the battle and noticed an entrance, deciding to venture inside. A few moments later, they defeated the monster, and Debo, looking tired, informed his team that it was challenging, just as the rumors had suggested. However, one of the team members soon pointed out that they could not see Shannon anywhere. Upon hearing this, Debo grew worried and wondered where she might have gone. He was furious that Shannon had acted on her own without waiting for them. At that moment, Erin instructed everyone to prepare, noting that a strong aura emanated from within the entrance, although she was unsure of its source. Debo asked if there was something inside, and Erin replied that she couldn't be certain, but it was something powerful and dangerous. Upon hearing this, Debo declared that he would be the one to retrieve Shannon, as it was his duty to ensure her safety. He instructed the others to guard the area while he went in. However, one team member advised Debo to calm down and avoid acting rashly, reminding him that Erin had just indicated there was something dangerous inside. At that moment, Erin surprised Debo by stating that she would accompany him. She explained that whatever was inside posed a threat to the Maple world, and it was her responsibility to confront it. With this consensus, the group decided to move toward the entrance and venture inside together. Moments later, Shannon was sitting near a massive tree, her brother's corpse lying in front of her. Just then, Erin, Debo, and the rest of the team arrived and called out to her. Upon seeing the lifeless body, they asked whose it was, and Shannon revealed that it belonged to her brother. Debo felt a surge of frustration at being unable to save him and urged her to stay where she was, promising that he would come to her. However, as he spoke, tears streamed down Shannon's face, and her expression shifted. She told Debo that she had known he would come to help her because he was kind, but then she added that there was no turning back now. Debo was left confused by her words. Shannon then asked Debo if he understood the meaning behind the name Zakum. She explained that Zakum was referred to as the Tree of Demons, and that while many believed the moving statues they encountered were Zakum, they were merely vessels used by it. She pointed to the massive tree in front of them and said it was the true Zakum. Shannon warned that they had yet to confront the real Zakum. Debo, confused, asked her what she meant, but Erin interrupted, thanking Shannon for the information, as she had not realized that Zakum had a main body. Erin reassured Shannon that she could relax, promising to slay the tree. Erin then warned Debo to take cover, as it could become dangerous and he might get crushed by the tree if he got caught up in it. As she spoke, Erin turned to Shannon and asked if she still had something to do regarding her brother's sacrifice. However, Shannon told them that it seemed they still did not understand her. She pulled out a red ball from her brother's pocket and explained that the ritual had already begun as soon as they entered the area. The red ball emitted a powerful magic, and Shannon informed them that Zakum used mediums beyond just statues. At that moment, Debo felt a sharp pain as a sword pierced his back, inflicted by one of his team members. Eren was shocked by the betrayal, but she quickly reacted when another teammate attacked her, managing to dodge the blow just in time. Debo was in severe pain and turned to his teammate Mira, asking her why she had stabbed him. However, as he looked at her face, he was shocked to see that it had changed, appearing as if she had been possessed by another entity. Eren quickly informed Debo that it was pointless to try to reason with Mira, as she and the others had been taken over and would now view anyone uninfected as a target for their vengeance. Eren then declared that it was time for the finale, and she was determined to give her all to end this conflict. At that moment, Shannon revealed that everything she had done and would do was in service of the Black Magician. Debo, at that moment, thought to himself that Shannon might have been possessed by Zakum. However, Eren urged him to stop hesitating and finish it quickly, reminding him that the woman before them was no longer Miria. Debo admitted to himself that he had known this from the start, but doubt still gripped him. As he hesitated, Eren stepped forward, activating her skill, adrenaline boost, and began fighting the enemies. Debo realized with a sinking feeling that he had made a grave mistake by suggesting the team venture into this place. Determined to take responsibility, Debo stood up and unleashed a powerful attack toward Miria. As the blow struck her, Debo felt a pang of guilt and silently apologized. In that moment, Miria reached out her hand toward his face. With a bright smile, she thanked him and asked him to take care of Eren. A wave of emotion surged through Debo as regret consumed him for having brought them to this place. Moments later, Eren continued battling fiercely, and while clashing with Zakum, she pointed out that the tree was Zakum's main body. As the battle intensified, Debo joined the fray to assist her. Together, they resolved to tear Zakum apart, unleashing a relentless barrage of attacks on the tree. Despite their combined efforts, they realized it was still not enough to defeat Zakum. Amidst the chaos, Shannon suddenly charged toward Debo with a knife, declaring her devotion to the Great One. In an instant, Eren intercepted and finished Shannon off, ending the threat she posed. With Shannon dealt with, Eren turned to Debo and stated that their next target was the statue. Debo agreed but warned that it would not allow them to destroy it so easily. As he spoke, Debo began to show signs of being affected by the enemy's powers. Eren quickly noticed the change, realizing with alarm that Debo was starting to succumb to possession, just as Miria had before him. Debo screamed in pain, his voice filled with anguish, and urged Eren to end his life quickly before he did something he would regret. With no other choice, Eren prepared herself, activating her powers as she apologized for what she was about to do. Debo, in that moment, smiled at her words and assured her that this was for the best. As the pain consumed him, Debo reflected on his mistakes, silently apologizing to everyone for dragging them into such a dire situation. He thought that what was happening to him might be a fitting punishment for his foolishness. Determined, he pleaded with Eren to finish him off before it was too late. Just as he spoke, his gaze shifted, and he saw his younger sister Denev lying lifeless on the ground. Confusion and horror overwhelmed him as he struggled to comprehend why she was there and what had happened to her. Debo stared ahead, his thoughts spiraling as he convinced himself that it must have been Eren who had brought his little sister to this place. Unbeknownst to him, the scene before him was nothing more than an illusion created by the monster possessing him. Unable to discern reality from deception, Debo believed the vision to be real and blamed Eren for what had happened to his sister. Eren, observing his distress, assured him that she would end things quickly. However, fully overtaken by possession, Debo's fury boiled over. Consumed by rage, he accused Eren of endangering his sister and vowed not to forgive her. Without hesitation, he lunged at Eren, delivering a powerful blow. Although Eren managed to block the attack, she immediately noticed that Debo's senses had become unnaturally heightened, a clear sign of the monster's influence. As the battle raged on, with both sides exchanging relentless attacks, Eren shifted her focus toward the statue. She managed to land a powerful strike on the monster, severing one of its hands. Seizing the momentum, she leapt into the air, determined to bring an end to the fight. Resolute, she activated one of her most powerful abilities, Final Blow. Just as she unleashed her attack, Debo suddenly appeared in front of her, shielding the monster from the strike. Shocked, Erin realized that she could not halt her attack, as this was her only opportunity to defeat the monster. In her mind, she silently apologized to Debo for what was about to happen. The devastating attack struck its target, causing a massive explosion that obliterated the surroundings and engulfed everything in its wake. Moments later, Debo regained consciousness, disoriented and confused. He questioned what was happening and wondered if Zakum was still alive. As these thoughts raced through his mind, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Erin. She told him that it seemed he had finally come to, adding that she was relieved because she thought she might have to leave without saying goodbye. Debo turned to look at her and was stunned to see Erin lying on the ground, badly injured. Concern filled him as he took in her battered state. He asked if she had taken all the damage meant for him, his voice heavy with worry. He reminded her that he had told her to kill him instead, insisting that she should not have sacrificed herself to save him. Struggling to understand, he asked why she had chosen to protect him rather than herself. Erin spoke softly, telling Debo that they had already failed once, 800 years ago. She admitted that she was no longer the person capable of stopping the Black Magician. Instead, she said that Debo possessed remarkable talent for someone so young, something she lacked. Debo, overwhelmed with emotion, replied that he could never become as strong as her, not even with an eternity to try. With a bright smile, Erin reassured him, saying she was entrusting the world to him from that moment onward. She expressed her confidence in his potential, reminding him that he was her only disciple. After saying this, Erin told Debo she was tired and was going to take a nap. Desperation gripped Debo as he pleaded with her to stay awake and open her eyes, but his efforts were in vain. Erin had already passed away, leaving him alone in the silence of her final moments. As Debo lay on his bed, he reflected on how Erin had closed her eyes forever. He knew he had to inform her friends about what had happened. Eventually, he left that place, feeling there was no place for him without Erin. The weight of his failure consumed him as he thought about how he had fallen short. He lamented the agony of being unable to protect the purpose he had only just discovered, of failing to atone for his sins, and of being unable to fulfill the final request of someone he held dear. Lost in these thoughts, Debo was startled when his little sister, Denev, entered the room. She told him she was relieved to see him awake, explaining that she had been worried because he had remained unconscious despite having no visible injuries. She mentioned that he had been sleep-talking and asked if he had been having a nightmare. Debo sat up and, after a pause, told her he did not remember anything about his dreams. As Debo finished speaking, a knock echoed from the door. Denev, puzzled since they were not expecting anyone, went to check who it was. Moments later, she called out to Debo, saying someone was there to see him. Debo, curious and slightly confused, wondered who would be looking for him at this hour. When he reached the door, he found Paume waiting outside. Without wasting any time, Paume informed him that their plans had been moved forward and instructed Debo to get ready quickly. Hearing this, Debo asked if they could at least get a holiday. Paume, unfazed, replied that Debo had already enjoyed plenty of rest and that it was more than enough. Frustrated, Debo muttered to himself, questioning why he had even bothered to ask. Paume then mentioned that he would need to borrow 200,000 meso from Debo. At this, Debo's temper flared, and he angrily refused, declaring that he had no intention of lending Paume any money. Paume and Abbas were discussing the Hob base that had been present in the previous gate. During their conversation, Abbas asked if it was true that the Hobbs had killed 97 people but that Paume had managed to survive by advancing his circle. Paume confirmed this, stating that it was indeed the case. Abbas, irritated by Paume's nonchalant attitude, began to wonder what he might be planning. Trying to get to the bottom of the situation, Abbas asked if Paume had any additional details about the events within the gate. He also warned Paume that he would only be rewarded for his role in the gate once he provided sufficient information. Abbas then suggested that Paume share everything he knew, emphasizing that Paume needed the money. In response, Paume admitted that he had made a mistake. Without hesitation, He pulled out 2 million mesos from his pocket and informed Abbas that he intended to settle his debts first. Paume then informed Abbas that the 2 million mesos he had brought were enough to settle the debt in full. Abbas, looking troubled, wondered to himself how Paume had managed to gather such a large sum. The amount he had been paying to Paume was nowhere near what Paume had now brought to the table, leading Abbas to suspect that Paume had been making money on the side in secret. Abbas also noted the timing of Paume's gesture, realizing that Paume was likely trying to extract the most value from the information he held. In response, Abbas congratulated Paume for becoming a free adventurer now that he had paid off his debts. He then remarked that, given the circumstances, it was only fitting that they resign the contract. Abbas asked Paume how much he would want for a signing bonus, assuring him that he would do his best to match the amount. When Paume heard Abbas' response, he calmly told him that the signing bonus would be 50 million mesos. Abbas, stunned by the amount, was in shock. He replied that Paume was just a C-class adventurer and that no one would pay him such a large sum. Hearing this, Paume stood up and informed Abbas that their conversation was over. Abbas tried to stop him, but Paume didn't look back and walked away without another word. A short time later, Paume returned to Debo. Debo, curious, asked how the discussion had gone. Paume explained that Abbas had rejected his request for the signing bonus. Debo, surprised, asked how much Paume had asked for, and Paume told him that he had requested 50 million mesos. Debo, shocked by the amount Paume had asked for, told him that he was crazy to request such a huge sum of money. However, Paume disagreed with Debo's assessment. Debo then expressed his frustration, pointing out that Paume had always been acting on his own without consulting him. But then Debo shifted the topic and asked why they had come to this place, the slum ground. Paume, intrigued, asked if Debo was familiar with the area. Debo replied that he knew it well, as he had done everything possible to escape from here since he was young. While he couldn't say that where he was living now was the best, he admitted it was still heaven compared to the slum ground. Paume then commented that he had heard this area used to be the most vibrant part of Lys. But seeing it now, he remarked that it was clearly a thing of the past. Debo added that, at present, the place was nothing more than a bandit's den and probably the worst part of Victoria Island. As Debo and Paume were talking and walking, a man suddenly flew toward them and landed on the ground. Both Debo and Paume were left wondering what was happening in the area. The man on the ground was quickly surrounded by a group of men. Seeing this, the man regretted the situation he found himself in, thinking things had been going well until then. Debo then turned to Paume, commenting that it seemed like a fight had broken out. He suggested that they simply walk around the area. However, just as they were about to move, the man on the ground, whose name was Ralph, stood up. He shouted toward Debo and Paume, calling them his brothers and asking why they were so late to come and rescue him. Both Debo and Paume were confused as to why the man was addressing them as brothers. Ralph then explained that the men surrounding him had begun accusing him of being a thief and had started beating him. With tears streaming down his face, Ralph begged Debo and Paume to help him, pleading for them to save him. Debo, frustrated by the situation the man had dragged them into, angrily asked what he was talking about. He added that no one would believe the man after seeing his face. But just as Debo said that, the leader of the group chasing Ralph addressed Paume and Debo. The leader explained that since their little brother had stolen his item and sold it, he would let them go if they paid for the stolen goods. He demanded 3 million mesos from them right away. Ralph, with an angry expression, retorted by asking the man if he had seen Ralph steal anything. He insisted that he was innocent and shouldn't be blamed unjustly. He told the men chasing him to get lost. The leader of the group shouted at Ralph, telling him that he might be asking for a death wish. However, before the situation escalated further, Paume threw 3 million mesos at the man's head and told him to get lost, now that the payment had been settled. Debo, shocked to see Paume casually handing over the money, asked what he was doing. Paume, addressing Ralph by name, told him to follow. Ralph, confused, wondered how Paume knew who he was. Later, Ralph asked Paume if he had truly come to this place to recruit him. He also inquired about the money and what would happen next. Paume replied that he didn't have any more money, as the amount he had given away earlier was all he had. Ralph then asked Paume who he was affiliated with, and Paume explained that he wasn't associated with anyone. Ralph, skeptical, asked if Paume was joking with him. He told Paume that he had no reason to join his party if Paume wasn't connected to any large guild. Debo, furious upon hearing what Ralph said to Paume, angrily told Ralph that he was a bastard and demanded Ralph spit out the 3 million mesos that Paume had paid for him. Ralph, smirking, responded that he hadn't asked them to pay for him and that they acted without consulting him. He added that he wasn't at fault at all. Ralph then remarked that since the two of them had come all the way to find him, they must be aware of his skills. He suggested that if they wanted him to join their team, they should pay him accordingly. Smirking again, he offered a special discount, saying he would join their party for 3 million mesos, and asked them what they thought of the deal. Debo, once again annoyed by Ralph's attitude, was about to respond when a mysterious man approached the three of them and introduced himself as Beiju, a member of the merchant union. He asked if Paume was present. Ralph, surprised that a member of the Kania merchant union had come to this place searching for Paume, was momentarily taken aback. Paume then stepped forward, introducing himself to Beiju. Paume greeted Beiju warmly, expressing his pleasure in meeting him, though he added that he would have preferred a better setting for their first encounter. Paume explained that circumstances hadn't allowed for that, and he apologized to Beiju. Beiju, acknowledging Paume's skills, informed him that the Kania merchant union had taken note of his successful raid on the 100-man gate. Beiju, being straightforward, told Paume that while it might seem sudden, the union was interested in scouting both him and his party. Beiju then explained that there would be a simple gate raiding test as part of the procedure, and the Kania merchant union would pay 3 million mesos up front. Additionally, a sign-on bonus of 50 million mesos would be provided once Paume and his team passed the test. Ralph was shocked by the large sum being offered to Paume, as it was an incredibly generous amount of money. With a smile, Beiju asked Paume if he was willing to join their guild. Beiju then turned to leave, telling Paume that the raid would take place in 3 days and wishing him good luck. As Beiju walked away, Paume, holding the 3 million mesos given to him by Beiju, threw it over to Ralph, telling him to take it as the bonus that Ralph had asked for. Paume then added that the contract term would be 1 year and that he would give Ralph another 7 million mesos after the successful raid. Debo was surprised by what Paume was offering to Ralph and, in that moment, asked if Paume had eaten something wrong that day. Debo couldn't believe Paume was willing to spend 10 million on someone like Ralph. Paume, however, changed the topic and told the two that they needed to get going, as they would be late for their next appointment. Debo was once again surprised, realizing there was still another place they had to go. Moments later, they arrived at their destination, and Debo was annoyed to see a familiar face he had hoped never to encounter again. It was none other than Kiri. Debo asked Paume why Kiri was there, and Kiri, upon hearing Debo, told him to keep quiet as she had come there only to fulfill her promise. Moments later, it began to rain, and the four of them stood in front of the gate. Debo remarked that it was a nice day for raiding a gate. As they scouted the surroundings, Kiri informed the others that there were 5 parties, totaling 50 people. Debo, upon hearing this, noted that this was a good enough number for a gate raid. However, Ralph wasn't pleased to see so many people involved. He expressed his frustration, saying it was pointless to bring so many, useless, people along, and he asked Paume if this would reduce the money he was going to make. At that moment, Beiju spoke up, introducing herself to all the adventurers who would be participating in the raid. She explained that, as they had all been briefed, the gate they would be raiding was an orange gate with a maximum entrance of 50 people and 3 scars. Beiju then added that she believed with their numbers, clearing the gate would not be a problem. Paume, however, thought to himself that while he had expected the Kania merchant union to contact him, he hadn't anticipated being brought there. He realized that they had already begun using this place. Although the timing was different from his past life, Paume reminded himself that it was a gate he had already cleared once before, so he was confident that his plan wouldn't need any changes. Beiju then informed everyone that all parties needed to shoot a signal flare if a second gate was found. Debo, hearing this, wondered what they meant by a second gate. Kiri explained that gates were categorized by their levels according to color, and a second gate indicated that there was another dungeon inside the gate. Since the orange gate had a two-gate layout, it meant they would need to raid another dungeon within it. Kiri also told Debo that since this was a second gate, it would feature entirely different terrains and monsters. She referred to Debo as a dummy and insisted that he remember what she had said. Debo, annoyed by Kiri's words, was about to respond when Ralph intervened, expressing surprise that Debo was so clueless. He added that this revelation was starting to worry him. Debo, growing even more frustrated, snapped at Ralph to keep quiet. Ralph then turned to El Paume and made one thing clear. He acknowledged that although El Paume had contracted him, that did not determine who would be the leader. He argued that the leader should be chosen based on skill. El Paume, upon hearing this, smiled at Ralph's words and remarked that Ralph was quite greedy. He agreed with Ralph's suggestion, stating that the leader would be determined by who contributed the most during the raid. Ralph, hearing El Paume's response, was satisfied with what he had heard. In that moment, Ralph thought to himself that El Paume had fallen for his trap. He believed that once he became the party leader, things would get interesting. With that, Ralph wished El Paume good luck. A few moments later, everything was ready, and all of the adventurers had entered the gate. Kiri then informed the group that it was finally starting. Meanwhile, Debo told El Paume that they would be able to earn 50 million mesos from this raid, urging him to take care of the gate quickly. However, before Debo could finish, Ralph interrupted, asking if Debo thought they were on a picnic. He added that Debo was just a useless first circle person. Debo, irritated by Ralph's words, snapped back, saying he couldn't stand Ralph any longer. He then challenged Ralph to a fight right then and there. Ralph then asked Debo why he wanted to fight him, knowing that Debo would lose. He added that he didn't want to engage in anything that wouldn't bring him any profit. Debo, even more annoyed, turned to El Paume and asked why he had hired someone like Ralph, as Ralph was only killing the morale of the group. Just as Debo spoke, he heard screams behind him. The rest of the adventurers were being killed by the monsters inside the gate. One of the adventurers shouted to the others, urging them to get their acts together and stay in formation, or they would all be done for. But then, another adventurer screamed in panic, warning everyone that the monster was an evil eye and they should all run. Moments later, Debo found himself fighting one of the monsters. He wondered what these creatures were, but before he could react, the monster was about to land a powerful blow on him. Just then, Ralph appeared and finished off the monster before it could attack. Ralph told Debo to pay attention. Kiri, on the other hand, was shocked by the situation, unable to believe that the gate was located in the middle of the monsters' territory. Just as she said that, many of the monsters charged toward them, but El Paume intervened, using his flame magic to deal with them easily. As El Paume fought against the monsters, he thought to himself that something was off. The evil eyes hadn't attacked them as soon as they entered before, and he noted that this was different from his previous life. At that moment, Kiri activated her skill, Rising Sun, and launched it toward the monster, but it dodged the attack. As Kiri processed this, she realized she couldn't quite grasp the monster's movement. Before she could react further, the monster launched a sneak attack that landed on Kiri. Several other monsters then charged toward her, and as they were about to finish her off, Ralph stepped in, swiftly eliminating all the monsters charging at Kiri. Debo was still struggling to fight one of the monsters when Ralph stepped in again, finishing off the monster with a single blow. With that, Ralph spoke up, expressing how exhilarating the fight was for him. He added that he would accept this, as he had already received his thanks earlier. As he said this, Ralph revealed to the others that he was a three-circle mage. Kiri, seeing that Ralph was already a three-circle adventurer, thought to herself that she didn't want to admit it, but a three-circle mage was on an entirely different level. At that moment, Ralph resumed his killing spree against the monsters. As he fought, he thought to himself that the monsters' movements were erratic, but that was all they had. He then reassured himself that Debo and Kiri would be fine, but El Paume, who controlled fire arrows with telekinesis, definitely had the skills that would make Kinya interested in him. Ralph considered that he didn't know about boss fights, but Paume's regular hunting speed was faster than his. With that thought, Ralph smiled, knowing that Paume would be undeniably useful to him. Ralph noted that the 50 million mesos contract fee was not an amount just anyone could secure. He added that, judging by how the merchant union was treating Paume, they would likely offer him even greater sums in the future. At that moment, Ralph's face lit up as he envisioned himself sitting atop a fortune after taking control of the party. The thought of success filled him with joy. Kiri, observing Ralph laughing while battling monsters, thought to herself that he resembled a monster himself, finding enjoyment in the chaos of the fight. As Ralph fought, he acknowledged internally how much he was enjoying the situation. However, just as he had this thought, Paume suddenly pushed him aside. Surprised by the action, Ralph confronted Paume, accusing him of a cheap attack and questioning whether he wanted to start a fight with him. Paume stated that he did not need Ralph's gratitude, leaving Ralph confused about the meaning behind his words. Ralph was about to ask for clarification when a barrage of arrows suddenly flew toward Paume. Reacting swiftly, Paume used the nearby monsters as shields, blocking the arrows from hitting him. Seeing that they were under attack, Ralph shouted in anger, demanding to know who was responsible. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure prepared another attack, aiming a new volley of arrows at Paume. However, Paume quickly identified the source of the attack and, once again, evaded the arrows by maneuvering the monsters into their path. As soon as the attack missed, Paume unleashed a fire arrow of his own toward the assailant, causing a massive explosion that engulfed the area where the attacker was hiding. Ralph, observing Paume's movements, was astonished by his ability to block the attack using the evil eye while simultaneously countering against the attacker. In that moment, Ralph marveled at the sheer audacity and precision of Paume's actions, deeming his strategy both daring and brilliant. As Ralph reflected on this, Debo urgently called out to Paume, warning him of an incoming attack. Paume noticed it a fraction too late, and the arrows struck him, triggering a massive explosion. Debo, witnessing this, called out to Paume in alarm, fearing the worst. However, as the smoke began to clear, Debo was stunned to see Paume still standing, bearing only minor injuries. Despite being hit by such a powerful attack, Paume had somehow already repositioned himself behind their group. Kiri, recognizing the escalating danger, shouted to Paume, suggesting they retreat before the situation worsened. Ralph, hearing this, questioned Kiri, asking where they could possibly retreat to. Even as he spoke, another volley of arrows hurtled toward them all. One of the adventurers urged the group to flee the area, but before they could act, a barrage of arrows rained down, striking many of the adventurers present. As one of the arrows closed in on an adventurer, Kiri intervened, using her solar slash skill to block the attack. In that moment, she turned to the adventurer still lying on the ground and told them they couldn't afford to remain idle, urging them to run to the forest if they wanted to survive. The adventurer, still on the ground, responded that they would have already done so if it were possible. As Kiri glanced toward the forest, she noticed hundreds of monsters watching them intently, their presence making any escape seem impossible. The adventurer explained that the monsters had been lying in wait, creating a trap, and admitted that they had no plan for how to get past them. As the adventurer spoke, a powerful fire arrow soared past her and into the crowd of monsters, obliterating most of those blocking the path. The arrow, unleashed by Paume, cleared the way, and he informed the adventurers that the path was now open for them. Ralph immediately sprinted toward the forest, calling out to Paume that he would go ahead. Kiri, seizing the moment, urged the remaining adventurers to stop hesitating and move quickly while they had the chance. With her command, the group began running toward the forest. While some adventurers retreated, others, including Debo, continued to fight. Debo, realizing the situation was dire, called out to Paume, warning that they would all be killed if the relentless arrows could not be stopped. Amidst the chaos, Paume, still engaged in battle, instructed Debo to listen carefully to his next words. At that moment, one of the enemies observed Paume's swift ability to pinpoint his location. Shocked, the enemy acknowledged to himself that Sir Evoke's concerns about Paume's prowess had not been unfounded. The enemy aimed his arrows at Paume, who was retreating, and muttered an apology, bidding Paume farewell as he prepared to kill him. He released the fire arrows, but Paume evaded them with remarkable agility. Frustrated, the enemy wondered how a magician could move so quickly. As he scanned the retreating group, the enemy noticed something unusual: there were only 6 people instead of 7. He realized that the one carrying the polearm, Debo, was missing. Before he could make sense of it, a powerful attack struck him from behind, leaving him reeling. The attack, devastating in its force, came from none other than Paume himself. The figure fleeing from the enemies, appearing to be Paume, was actually Debo in disguise, crafted to deceive the attackers. As Debo pulled back his hood, he remarked that the plan to exchange disguises had worked perfectly and proudly added that it was thanks to his efforts. However, before he could finish speaking, an arrow struck him square in the chest. Kiri, seeing this, grew alarmed and called out to Debo in concern. At that moment, another volley of arrows rained down, many striking the adventurers. Kiri, despite her worry, carried the injured Debo, urging the others to retreat as quickly as possible. Yet, just as she spoke, an arrow struck her leg, causing severe damage and leaving her unable to move. As another arrow closed in on Kiri and Debo, Ralph intervened, grabbing both of them and sprinting away from the area. While running, he quipped that he felt like a father taking care of troublesome children, even though he had no kids of his own. Despite the danger, he chastised them for being so troublesome as he carried them to safety. The enemy taunted the 3, declaring that no matter where they ran, they would never escape his range. As he drew his bow to unleash another attack, he suddenly froze, his expression shifting to one of surprise as he noticed something unexpected. Meanwhile, Kiri asked the others why they were running in this particular direction, wondering if there was a plan. Debo admitted he had no idea but urged her to stay quiet, follow along, and trust Paume's instructions. Ralph, overhearing this, scoffed and retorted that Debo, barely clinging to life, was still acting high and mighty. As Ralph spoke, their conversation was interrupted by an astonishing sight ahead of them. It was none other than the second gate. Ralph could hardly believe they had already found the second gate. In that moment, he realized Paume must have known its location all along and had carefully planned their escape route. This explained why they had been running in a specific direction. Smiling to himself, Ralph felt a surge of gratitude, thinking that, thanks to Paume, they had a chance to survive. As he assessed the situation, Ralph calculated that the enemy was roughly 100 meters away. He figured they could reach the gate faster than the arrows could reach them at that distance. However, Debo suddenly stopped him and questioned whether they intended to enter the second gate without Paume. Ralph chuckled in response and assured Debo that this was exactly what Paume had planned for them, leading the 3 of them safely to the second gate. Ralph, irritated by the commotion, shouted at the other 2 to stop squirming. He declared that they would enter the gate first and wait inside for Paume to join them. However, just as he said this, a barrage of arrows flew toward them, causing a massive explosion in their vicinity. Startled, Ralph tried to make sense of what was happening. The attack had come from ahead, even though he was certain the enemies were behind them. He wondered how the attackers could have gotten in front of them in such a short time. As Ralph grappled with these thoughts, another wave of arrows streaked toward him. At the last moment, Debo's axe intercepted the arrows, deflecting them and saving Ralph. Debo, surprised by his own weapon's sudden return, realized that the polearm Paume had taken earlier had somehow found its way back to him. Without hesitation, Debo reclaimed his weapon, gripping it firmly as he prepared for the next move. Kiri and Ralph stood still, each lost in thought, trying to figure out what to do next in the situation. Debo, growing increasingly frustrated as he observed the 2 of them, knew exactly what needed to be done. He understood what Paume wanted them to do, and without hesitation, Debo decided to take matters into his own hands. With a swift motion, he kicked both Ralph and Kiri into the second gate, disregarding their objections. He then followed them in, entering the gate ahead of them. The enemy, watching this unfold, was left stunned. Seeing the 3 of them, who he had been relentlessly chasing, now safely inside the gate, he couldn't help but think to himself that they were all out of their minds for making such a bold move. Moments later, the enemy stood atop a tree, methodically slaying all the one-eyed monsters that dared cross his path. As he fought, he couldn't help but wonder why Paume was not making any moves. He speculated that Paume might be hiding, stalling for time while trying to find a way to confront him. However, the enemy quickly dismissed this thought, deciding that it would be useless for Paume to employ such tactics. He was confident that it would not pose a problem for him. With a smirk, he decided to play along with Paume's strategy, curious to see just how much Paume would struggle. As the battle continued, the enemy reflected on his past. He remembered the 13th year when Suravok had taken him in, the time of the selection match where 300 assassins fought each other for survival. It lasted for 7 days, and despite the carnage, no one had been able to locate him. Because of his ability to remain hidden and undetected, Suravok had given him the title of Ghost. As the enemy pondered these thoughts, he suddenly heard a sound nearby. Without hesitation, he shot an arrow toward the source of the movement, only to find that he had struck another one-eyed monster. Frustrated, he cursed under his breath, irritated that it was not Paume once again. Just as he was thinking about this, a counterattack came flying toward him. The enemy quickly dodged, though he was surprised to find that Paume was a bit more skilled than he had anticipated. Still, the enemy thought to himself that Paume should not have made that move. He realized that the attack had exposed Paume's position, and with that, the enemy fired a barrage of arrows in the direction where he believed Paume to be. However, when the arrows struck the area, they found no one there. Instead, another counterattack was launched at him from a different angle. The enemy was taken by surprise as another attack came toward him, this time from behind. He managed to dodge the strike, but the encounter led him to suspect that Paume might be using telekinesis to mislead him about his position. Annoyed, the enemy muttered that Paume was relying on cheap tricks, and he warned that such tactics wouldn't work on him. As they continued exchanging attacks, a massive explosion erupted when 2 of the attacks collided. The enemy's vision was immediately obscured by smoke, making it difficult to see. However, as the smoke began to clear, he realized he was starting to struggle more than he had anticipated in his fight with Paume. A grin spread across his face as he thought to himself that this was becoming more interesting than he had expected. A few moments later, Paume noticed the silence that had settled around him. He wondered if the enemy had decided to hide for real, and upon realizing this, he thought to himself that dealing with the enemy now would be more troublesome than expected. Paume also found it impressive that the enemy could conceal his presence to such an extent. He recalled that during his previous life, no one in the gate had possessed such an ability. Considering this, Paume concluded that the enemy must be an assassin sent by Kania. He then thought to himself that it was no surprise the future had changed since his entry into the 100-man gate. At that very moment, as Paume was reflecting on this, a loud voice suddenly called out to him. Surprised, Paume realized that the enemy had revealed himself with a challenge. The enemy then addressed Paume, telling him that he must already know the truth and that it was pointless to waste any more time. The enemy added that nothing would change by hiding like a little rat. He shouted, saying that he had heard rumors about Paume's preference for facing things head-on, and asked if Paume had changed his mind, now choosing to hide like a rat. As he spoke, the enemy laughed loudly, hoping to provoke Paume into coming out. Paume moved closer to the enemy, but as he advanced, he was surprised to see that the enemy, whom he had been keeping track of, had shifted to a completely different position. Paume wondered how the enemy had managed this without revealing a hint of presence. He suspected the enemy was using either a teleportation skill or a quiver flow technique. Just as Paume drew closer, the enemy suddenly sensed his presence. In an instant, the enemy unleashed a barrage of arrows toward Paume. Ralph, Kiri, and Debo had just entered the second gate, and Debo was regretting their decision to leave Paume behind. Ralph, however, asked Debo if someone had told him to make that choice, pointing out that it was Debo who had pushed the 3 of them to enter the gate in the first place. Debo, frustrated, thought to himself that Paume was a cocky bastard. He couldn't understand how Paume was going to handle everything alone on the other side. Kiri, on the other hand, reassured Debo that she was confident Paume had it all planned out, as Paume had clearly intended for the situation to unfold this way. As Kiri spoke, Debo's gaze fell to the floor, where he was shocked to see numerous skeletal corpses scattered around. He turned to the others and asked what the corpses were, as he had believed the gate was only a 3-scar gate. The sight of a mountain of corpses left him stunned and confused. Debo looked around at the corpses and told the others that the number on the ground was far from enough for just 3 parties to handle the gate. He added that they would need at least 100 to conquer the dungeon. Kiri then spoke up, finally understanding the situation. She explained that everything pointed to this being a trap. The sudden request, the trolling from the first floor, and the number of corpses not matching the level of the gate all indicated that Kania was connected to the Black Magician. Debo was taken aback by this revelation. Kiri continued, saying that the enemies must have lured adventurers into the gate to deal with them. She was also surprised to learn that the Kania Guild had sent assassins in addition to their initial involvement in the gate. At that moment, Kiri turned to the others and remarked that Paume's suspicion about them taking the bait had been correct all along. Ralph interrupted the conversation, telling the others that while Kiri's story was interesting, they should save the discussion for later, as the homeowner seemed quite angry. At that moment, all 3 of them looked ahead and were surprised to find the boss monster standing before them. Kiri, taken aback, asked if the monster in front of them was indeed the boss of the area. Ralph, laughing nervously, told them it seemed he would have to pay rent after all. He then reassured them, saying they were lucky to have him with them, as he was about to use a move he had never shown anyone before. Recalling the thoughts of other adventurers regarding Ralph, some had called him a terrible person, while others labeled him a bastard who would do anything for money. However, despite their opinions, all the adventurers agreed on one thing: Ralph was incredibly useful. His skills were top-notch, and it was widely believed that Ralph was probably at the peak of the 3rd circle as a bishop healer. In that moment, Ralph used his healing skill on Debo and Kiri, instantly restoring all of their injuries. Both Debo and Kiri were surprised to learn that Ralph's actual class was a bishop and not a combat class. Kiri, in particular, was amazed to realize that Ralph had been defeating the monsters without even using his true abilities. After healing them, Ralph told the 2 that now that they were feeling better, they should prepare to fight the monster in front of them, as it seemed the creature couldn't wait any longer. He then urged them to show their skills, as they were fully healed. With that, Ralph charged toward the monster, and it immediately began attacking. Debo and Kiri, surprised by Ralph's bold move, decided to join the fight as well. As the 3 continued to battle the monster, they started to overpower it, but the monster still managed to land a few hits on Kiri and Debo. Seeing this, Ralph told the 2 that they were very needy and, with that, used his healing skill on them once again. Debo was surprised by how differently Ralph fought. Not only was Ralph healing from the rear, but he was also attacking to cover the 2, ensuring that the timing of his heals was precise. He only cast healing when Debo and Kiri were in danger. Ralph then spoke up, telling them that he had forgotten to mention that the first healing had been a service, but from then on, they would have to pay for any future healing. At that moment, Ralph used another skill called Blessed on Debo and Kiri. Kiri was surprised to feel a surge of power within her, but Ralph immediately added that the cost for this skill would be 100 mesos per cast. Upon hearing this, both Debo and Kiri shouted at Ralph, telling him they no longer needed it. Moments after the fight with the monster had ended, Ralph stood with little to no injuries, while the other 2 were bruised but fortunately had no serious wounds. Kiri sat on the floor, telling the others that the monster had been a tough opponent. Ralph, on the other hand, downplayed the fight, saying the boss monster wasn't that big of a deal. He added that they shouldn't start tallying up the pay now that the boss was defeated. However, just as he said that, the boss monster let out a loud roar, revealing it was still alive. Debo, standing near the monster's mouth, remarked that its breath smelled awful and told it to be quiet. He added that he would put the monster to rest soon. But at that moment, the monster began to rise again, surprising all 3 of them. Inside the first gate, Paume was struggling against his enemy, dodging the attacks the enemy sent toward him. As he ran, Paume thought to himself that something felt off, as he couldn't pinpoint the enemy's firing position. A 3rd circle archer could use a skill called Quiver Flow, a teleportation ability that returned the user to a set point. This meant that only one position could be set at a time, so Paume reasoned that it should be impossible for the enemy to be moving in such a manner. Meanwhile, the enemy laughed at Paume's struggles, telling him that he had already warned him it would be useless to run. The enemy added that he was about to fall asleep because Paume was so slow in escaping. Paume shot a fire arrow at the enemy, but it completely missed. The enemy then asked where Paume was aiming, warning him that if he continued wasting his skills like that, Paume would suffer from mana shock. At that moment, Paume started vomiting blood from overusing his powers. The enemy, realizing this, thought that Paume might have been trying to distract him with the skill to make a run for the second gate. Laughing, the enemy told Paume that there was no chance he would let him escape. As Paume continued running tirelessly from the enemy, he realized he couldn't keep up a battle of attrition against an opponent whose location he couldn't even figure out. He knew that if things continued this way, it would be all over for him. Determined, Paume decided that before that could happen, he needed to do something about it. In that moment, Paume took out a bottle filled with a blue potion. Realizing he didn't have the luxury of time to think things through, he quickly drank the mana potion to replenish his mana and launched a powerful fire arrow at the enemy. The enemy, however, scoffed at Paume, calling him foolish and confident that his attacks would not work. He easily dodged the initial fire arrow, but to his surprise, 6 more fire arrows followed, coming toward him at once. The enemy could hardly believe that Paume had managed to cast the highest grade skill a third circle mage could use during a mana shock. The enemy wondered if Paume was trying to sacrifice himself. On the other hand, Paume, thinking that the enemy's secret might be exactly what he suspected, told himself that he would drag the enemy out, even if it meant forcing himself. As the enemy dodged the attacks, he thought to himself that Paume was firing all the fire arrows without even knowing the enemy's location. The enemy believed that Paume must be crazy and that he had lost his mind. Paume, however, continued to fire the arrows, telling himself that he wasn't done yet, that he had to stay standing, and that he had to hold on. The enemy thought Paume was a fool, convinced that his random attacks would never hit their target. He added that Paume's fate was sealed and that he would die from mana shock, feeling the agony of his own body falling apart. Despite this, Paume did not stop. He kept launching every attack he could towards the enemy. As the enemy dodged the onslaught, he finally realized that the entire area had caught fire. Paume had been aiming for this outcome all along. The enemy knew it was becoming dangerous to stay in the area for much longer, or he would be burned alive. As the enemy was running away from the area, he unexpectedly found himself in an open field. In that moment, he thought to himself that he had to reach that area, but then he realized that the open field had appeared too suddenly. The timing felt too suspicious, and the enemy quickly understood that it was a trap. Deciding to retreat, he turned back, but just as he did, Paume finally pinpointed the enemy's location. With swift precision, Paume unleashed a powerful attack that sent the enemy flying. The enemy quickly recovered and shot arrows toward Paume, but by then, Paume was already too close. Prepared for another strike, Paume readied himself to launch another powerful attack. Paume's strike narrowly missed as the enemy dodged with swift precision. Reacting instantly, Paume pressed forward with another attack, but the enemy countered, forcing him to reassess the situation. Realizing he couldn't endure much longer, Paume resolved to end the fight swiftly. Pouring all his energy into a decisive counter, he overpowered the enemy and unleashed a powerful blow, sending them flying backward. As Paume prepared to follow up with another devastating strike, a second enemy emerged from behind, launching an attack that forced Paume to retreat and created distance between him and his opponent. The second enemy called out to his fallen comrade, urging him to rise quickly. He noted that Paume lacked the time to gather mana for offensive magic and insisted they finish the fight without delay. With that, he drew his bow and prepared to release a flurry of arrows at Paume. As the enemy spoke, a dagger suddenly flew toward him. He sensed the attack just in time, narrowly dodging it. A brief moment of confusion followed as he wondered where the dagger had come from. The thought crossed his mind that Paume might be using telekinesis, a technique that consumed minimal mana. Before the enemy could fully process the thought, another adversary unleashed a powerful strike at Paume. Paume evaded the attack with quick reflexes. The enemy scoffed at Paume's tricks, but just as he prepared to launch another assault, a barrage of rocks surged forward, propelled by Paume's telekinesis. The rocks struck the enemy with force, sending him flying backward. A third opponent closed in on Paume, engaging him in close combat. As their weapons clashed, the enemy's surprise grew. Paume, whom they believed to be purely a magician, displayed unexpected prowess in melee combat, handling his weapon with skill and precision. As the two clashed, Paume steadily gained the upper hand, his superior skill forcing the enemy onto the defensive. Seizing the momentum, Paume unleashed a rapid series of strikes, overwhelming his opponent. The enemy quickly realized the dire situation he was in, his thoughts racing with the certainty that defeat was imminent. Determined not to let his opponent recover, Paume pressed forward, preparing to land a decisive blow. Just as his attack neared completion, the enemy's comrade launched a sudden sneak attack. An arrow flew through the air, striking Paume's hand and rendering one of his arms useless in the fight. Seeing this, the enemy smirked, praising his comrade's skill. Without hesitation, he grabbed a dagger from the ground and advanced, taunting Paume by questioning what he could possibly achieve with only one arm. Despite the injury, Paume remained unfazed. He met the enemy's attacks head-on, maintaining his composure and continuing to fight with unrelenting determination. To the enemy's astonishment, Paume's strength and precision did not waver. Even with one arm, he overpowered his opponent, shattering the enemy's confidence and leaving him bewildered by Paume's resilience. Paume managed to seize the enemy, preventing any chance of escape. Watching this unfold, the enemy's comrade warned Paume to release him, threatening to fill Paume with more arrows if he refused. Ignoring the warning, Paume activated his skill and unleashed a devastating attack upon both himself and the enemy he held. The enemy struggled in Paume's grip, shouting that Paume was insane and demanding he stop the attack. Paume paid no attention, and the skill erupted, triggering a massive explosion that engulfed the area. When the smoke cleared, both Paume and the enemy emerged, battered and wounded but still alive. Despite their injuries, the battle pressed on. The moment their eyes met, they lunged at each other, resuming the fight without hesitation. As they clashed, the enemy sneered, remarking that Paume was already half dead and that he intended to finish the fight quickly. In that instant, both fighters summoned their remaining strength, launching powerful strikes aimed directly at one another. A short while later, the second enemy searched frantically for his comrade. As he sprinted through the area, his eyes caught sight of a figure lying on the ground. The clothes were unmistakably his comrade's. Rushing over, he knelt and helped him to his feet, urging him to stay strong and not give in. He reminded his comrade that they had dragged the fight on for too long and insisted they retrieve the phoenix's feather and leave the gate immediately. As they began to walk, the enemy glanced to the side and froze in shock. His real comrade's lifeless body lay on the ground, unmoving. Confusion swept over him as he processed the scene. The realization struck too late. In an instant, the man he had been supporting struck, swiftly beheading him. The figure he thought was his comrade was, in fact, Paume, disguised in the fallen enemy's clothes. With both opponents defeated, Paume collapsed to the ground, drained of all energy. Lying there, he let out a weary sigh, silently cursing his growing frustration with bow users. Inside the second gate, Debo struggled against the boss monster, barely managing to hold his ground as the creature battered him from side to side. Just as Debo began to falter, Ralph rushed forward, delivering a powerful strike against the monster. However, as the attack landed, Ralph was shocked to see that it barely left a mark. The monster's hide was far tougher than he had anticipated. Before Ralph could react, the creature grabbed him and pressed him against its body with crushing force. Ralph gritted his teeth, straining against the monster's overwhelming strength. Frustration boiled within him as he found himself unable to break free. At that critical moment, Kiri stepped in, activating her solar/skill. Her blade sliced through the monster's hand, severing its grip and allowing Ralph to escape. As Ralph staggered back, Kiri calmly remarked that with this, she had repaid him for the help he had given them earlier. Without wasting time, Kiri pulled Ralph away from the monster, retreating to a safer distance just before the creature launched another attack. The monster, unwilling to let them escape, lunged forward and unleashed a powerful strike in their direction. Ralph and Kiri managed to dodge just in time, narrowly avoiding the attack. As the three of them sprinted away from the creature, Ralph used his healing skill on Debo and Kiri, helping to restore their strength. While they ran, Debo glanced over at Ralph and asked if he had come up with a plan to handle the boss monster. He pointed out that continuing to flee wasn't going to end well for any of them. Ralph responded that the monster's weakness lay in its back. Hearing this, Debo pressed for more details, explaining that the monster was massive and Ralph's instructions were too vague. He needed to know exactly where the weak point was. Ralph, irritated by Debo's questioning, told him to stay quiet and focus. He asked Debo to distract the monster and draw its attention, giving Ralph the chance to get close enough to strike at its weakness. Debo followed Ralph's instructions, drawing the monster's attention away from Ralph and Kiri. As the boss monster fixated on Debo, Ralph and Kiri crept around to attack from behind. However, just as they approached the monster's weak spot, it sensed their presence and blocked their path, preventing them from getting any closer. Frustrated by the monster's awareness, Debo realized it wasn't just a lumbering brute. Determined to break through, he launched a powerful strike, but the monster swiftly countered, slamming him hard into the ground. Debo struggled to rise, but the attack had left him badly injured. Kiri immediately called out to Ralph, urging him to heal Debo. Before Ralph could act, the monster unleashed another crushing blow aimed directly at Debo. Kiri watched in alarm, unsure if Debo could withstand the assault. With Debo weakened, the monster shifted its focus to Ralph and Kiri, turning its attention fully toward the two of them. Ralph informed Kiri that he had only 4 heals left and urged her to focus on dodging the monster's attacks as best as she could. He added that he would search for an opening, suggesting they spread out to divide the monster's attention. As they moved apart, the monster suddenly charged at full speed, closing the distance in an instant. It struck Kiri with tremendous force, knocking her unconscious. Ralph rushed to her side and used his healing skill, but as the magic took effect, he realized she had already fainted. Though her wounds were healed, she wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. Ralph frowned, frustrated by the wasted use of his limited healing. Now left to face the monster alone, Ralph stood his ground while Debo remained motionless, still recovering from the earlier attack. As Debo lay there, flashes of memory surfaced, moments from his past conversation with Paume replaying in his mind. Paume told Debo that he had the potential to gain another circle. Debo was surprised by the remark, prompting Paume to explain that Debo already had enough experience to reach the second circle. Paume suggested that advancing would be beneficial for Debo's future. Debo questioned if achieving another circle was something he could simply will into existence. In response, Paume explained that enlightenment was shaped by one's thoughts. Debo, puzzled by the concept, asked Paume to clarify what he meant by enlightenment and if he could teach him more about it. Paume took a sip of his tea before answering. He explained that the path to enlightenment was different for everyone, and even if he shared his own experience, it wouldn't necessarily help Debo. Unsatisfied, Debo pressed further, asking what Paume expected him to do. Paume advised him to find a personal keyword, something that resonated deeply with him. He suggested it could stem from Debo's understanding of mana, his pursuit of knowledge, or even an unforgettable memory. As Debo recalled his conversation with Paume, he suddenly regained consciousness. His heart raced, and he felt an overwhelming surge of power. Without hesitation, Debo launched himself toward the monster, preparing to deliver a devastating blow. The monster, noticing that Debo was back on his feet, braced itself to counter with a powerful attack. However, Debo was quicker, overpowering the monster and cutting through its strike with ease. Ralph, watching in astonishment, was taken aback by how Debo had sliced through the monster and the ice in one swift motion. He noticed a significant change in Debo. On his arm, there was now a mark indicating that Debo had reached the second circle. Debo had leveled up. Not pausing for a moment, Debo leapt onto the monster's back and aimed a powerful strike at the sword embedded in its body. The sword sank deeper, nearly shattering the monster's core and almost killing it instantly. However, in its final moments, the monster grabbed Debo and tried to crush him with its immense strength. Despite the pressure, Debo fought back fiercely, refusing to give up so easily. As Debo struggled to defend himself against the monster's relentless attacks, Ralph stepped forward and launched a powerful strike toward the monster's head. The attack loosened the monster's grip on Debo, and Ralph immediately used his healing skill on Debo, urging him to get up since the fight was far from over. With his strength restored, Debo broke free from the monster's grasp and delivered a devastating blow, shattering the monster's hand. Despite the heavy damage, the monster refused to give up and managed to grab Ralph, attempting to crush him with its immense strength. However, Ralph used his healing skill once more, not on himself, but on Debo. He then told the monster that it was foolish to focus on him, as it was too late for the monster to worry about him. At that moment, Debo launched himself upward, higher than the monster's towering form. With a powerful strike, he drove the sword deeper into the monster's back, penetrating its core and shattering it completely. The monster let out a scream of pain and agony as its core shattered. Just as Debo was about to deliver another attack, the monster suddenly shoved him aside, sending both Debo and Ralph flying backward. Debo, confused, watched as the monster remained standing despite its core being destroyed. He turned to Ralph, but found him lying unconscious on the ground. Instead of attacking, the monster panicked and began to flee. As it did, its body began to crumble. The monster's hands fell off first, followed by its legs. In the final moments, the monster disintegrated into pieces. Moments later, Kiri began to regain consciousness. As her eyes fluttered open, Debo called out to her, relieved that she was finally awake. Looking around, Kiri saw that they were inside a cave, with a bonfire in the center. Surprised that they were still alive, she asked Debo what had happened to the monster. Upon hearing Kiri's question, Debo asked if she could feel the fur covering her, keeping her warm. Kiri quickly understood that they had successfully dealt with the boss monster. Debo then mentioned that he was hungry and attempted to eat the monster's meat. However, he found it to be too tough and chewy. Kiri, hearing this, remarked that Debo had guts for trying. Changing the topic, Kiri asked if Debo had been waiting for her and Ralph to wake up. Debo explained that it wasn't exactly like that. He added that he had no choice, as there was no escape gate to be found. With the harsh weather, he figured resting for a while was the best option. He also noted that Ralph's condition seemed pretty bad, so he planned to scout the area once the blizzard calmed down. Debo suggested that Kiri rest in the cave while he went out to search for the escape gate. Later, as Debo scouted the area, he thought to himself that the day was already over. However, he still had no idea what had happened to Paume. The uncertainty worried him, and his thoughts became jumbled. As Debo was lost in thought, a monster suddenly appeared behind him. He immediately told himself that he had expected something like this to happen. He had held back due to the interruptions these monsters were causing, but now, he was ready to fight. Debo drew his axe, prepared to take on all the monsters in the area. Later, Debo returned to the cave, and Kiri asked if he had found the exit. As soon as she saw Debo, she was surprised to see him covered in monster blood and asked why he looked like that. Debo, however, seemed unfazed. He greeted Kiri with a, "Good morning," and explained that he had come across a few monsters on his way. Kiri, hearing this, was surprised that there were still monsters alive. She expressed concern, saying it was dangerous, and offered to join Debo in searching for the exit. However, Debo sat down and told her that someone needed to stay with Ralph. It wouldn't be wise to leave him alone, as they were all still comrades in the end. Kiri, however, insisted on joining Debo, stating that it wasn't something he should handle alone. But Debo told Kiri to be quiet, explaining that it would be better for only one person to scout to avoid doubling back over the same areas. He urged Kiri not to waste her strength and instead get some much-needed rest. After saying that, Debo lay down on the floor to rest. Kiri, still watching Debo, felt concerned for him. She knew he was trying to act tough, but she could see he was already pushing himself to his limits. Later, Debo was back outside, still battling the monsters. Although he struggled, he managed to defeat every monster in the area. Exhausted, Debo lay on the ground, reflecting on how dangerous the fight had been. He thought to himself that there had been moments when he truly believed he might die, but somehow, he had fought through and managed to overpower the monsters. As Debo was regaining his composure, he was surprised to see a human figure sitting against a wall. However, upon closer inspection, he realized the person was no longer alive, but a corpse. Debo noted that the person had not been dead for long. As he searched through the body, he found a letter and thought to himself that it might be the person's will. Upon opening the letter, Debo saw it was filled with writing. The letter's contents revealed that the person had written it to entrust it to whoever found it. The person mentioned that, though it wasn't much of a reward, they were offering the gloves they were wearing to the person who discovered the letter, especially if they were a warrior of the warrior mastery class, as the gloves would be of great help. The person went on to explain that they had fallen into Kania's trap, and all of their comrades had been killed by the snow yeti. If there was any silver lining, it was that they had managed to locate the escape gate. Unfortunately, the gate seemed to be a special one, and it appeared that the boss had to be defeated to activate it. The letter concluded with a rough map of the gate's location on the back and a prayer that whoever found the letter would have the strength to escape and deliver it in their place. Debo was saddened as he read the letter. After sending his regards, he returned to the cave to inform Kiri and Ralph that he had found the escape gate. Moments later, the three of them stood before the gate and successfully opened it after defeating the monster. Without hesitation, they entered the gate and, upon reaching their world, Debo asked Kiri what they should do next. Kiri, after considering their condition, suggested that they first organize themselves, as neither Debo nor Kiri were in any condition to act at that moment. However, just as Kiri spoke, a voice called out to them, asking if their comrade, the one they had sent to annihilate them, had fallen. Debo immediately recognized the voice. It was from Kania's members, and they were still waiting for them. Debo thought to himself that the situation was dire and that he wasn't capable of facing the enemies in his current state. The enemy then reassured them not to worry, claiming that they would finish off Debo and the others in the blink of an eye. As they charged toward the three of them, Kiri managed to block most of the attacks, but she couldn't handle them all alone. One of the attacks struck her, injuring her badly. Just as the enemies were about to finish off Debo, Kiri, and Ralph, multiple fire arrows flew in from behind, striking all of the enemies charging toward them. The three were surprised to see the enemies instantly annihilated. Within seconds, all of them were dead. Debo smiled and began to speak, but before he could finish his sentence, Paume appeared and asked if Debo had been eager to see him. Debo, still smiling at Paume's remark, replied that they would leave it at that. He added that since Paume was late, it was only fair that Paume buy them all a few beers. Both of them smiled at each other, sharing a light-hearted moment. Moments later, in Avoke's mansion, he was petting his monster pet, deep in thought. He pondered how someone as skilled as Paume had appeared out of nowhere, with no one knowing who could be behind it. Avoke considered that this could cause quite an uproar among the people. As he was thinking, one of his subordinates entered and informed him that Paume had returned from the gate. The subordinate then asked Avoke what they should do about the contract they had arranged with Paume. Upon hearing this, Avoke's anger flared, and he immediately instructed his subordinate to have Paume killed. The subordinate was shocked by Avoke's sudden decision, but Avoke, unfazed, explained that they couldn't afford to worry about public opinion. Paume was simply too unpredictable. Avoke then asked if everything happening was part of Paume's plan and added that they would come up with a justification for the situation later. At that moment, the subordinate revealed that Paume was not alone. Avoke was surprised when he heard from his subordinate that Paume was not alone. The subordinate added that Paume was with other people. Moments later, Paume and the others arrived at Debo's home. Ralph, while eating Debo's sister's cooking, remarked that the food tasted terrible. Debo, furious upon hearing this, told Ralph not to insult his sister's cooking and added that Ralph should just shut up and eat the food. Ralph, however, suggested that Debo's sister should have used more salt. Debo's sister, unbothered by Ralph's comment, casually replied that they should let her know if it wasn't enough. Meanwhile, Kiri thanked Debo's sister for the meal. Debo, slightly embarrassed, explained that this was why he didn't want to bring them to his house. Kiri, however, reassured him that she was certain Kania had heard the news by then, and it wouldn't be wise for them to split up. She added that Debo's place was the safest option, especially for the sake of Debo's sister. As Kiri was speaking, suggesting that even if they hid, they would eventually be caught, the door to the house suddenly opened. El Paume stood at the entrance and asked everyone how they were feeling. Debo immediately asked El Paume where he had been, and El Paume replied that he had some business to attend to. Ralph then seized the opportunity and said it was good timing. He mentioned that he wanted to discuss splitting the reward. Ralph suggested postponing the conversation about the party leaders since their shares were fairly similar and asked El Paume when they would receive the extra 7 million mesos. Debo, however, was furious upon hearing that and immediately shouted at Ralph, telling him that he had lost his mind. He was stunned that Ralph would even consider going to Kania to ask for money in such a situation. Debo then added that Ralph had also claimed that Debo was the one who had defeated the Snow Yeti all on his own. Ralph, upon hearing this, denied it and said he didn't remember saying anything like that. Debo, now even more frustrated, pointed out that Ralph had done nothing but sleep while Debo had been the one searching for the exit. Kiri then mentioned that she had heard El Paume had also fought a pair of assassin twins, but Ralph interrupted, asking if anyone had actually witnessed El Paume in action. Debo, infuriated, called Ralph a piece of trash for his remarks. Kiri, sensing the rising tension, then asked El Paume what their next move was. El Paume explained that Kania would likely try something again, and when that happened, they would need to act. However, before El Paume could say more, Abbas appeared at the door, asking how long El Paume intended to keep him waiting outside. Debo's sister, Denev, then inquired about Abbas's identity. Abbas replied, telling Denev to inform El Paume that he needed to hurry. That's all for today, thanks for watching.